We're gonna proceed with the President's report, which is first on the agenda.
So thank you, Chairman Seelman. I'm pleased to report a number of updates, including increases in student applications throughout the system and the state budget process. I'll first begin by sharing some statistics related to the diversity of our students and faculty. As shown in this slide that you can see, the percent of African American undergraduate student ranges from a low of 3.7% to a high of 15.6% at UMSL. As you can see, for Hispanic faculty as a percentage, it ranges from a low of 1.2% at UMSL to a high of 4.3% at Mizzou. But just looking at these numbers really do not tell the entire story in terms of the context of how we compare with other universities. In the next slide here, I provide a comparison of our universities, the 4 universities that we have, with the 57 top public universities as ranked by U.S. News & World Report. And as you can see from this list, UMSL, among that group, has the highest percentage of African American students, followed by number 4th place, which is UMKC, and then number 12 at 8.1% at Mizzou. It's important to recognize that Mizzou is higher than many universities that are highly prominent universities in the United States, including Virginia, Illinois, Connecticut, Ohio State. While we have some work to do, I'm also very heartened by the fact that we've made progress during the past few years. Now, if we look at Hispanic students, there is more work to do. The highest rank among the group of the top 57 universities is at UMKC at 8.9%, with the lowest at 3.1% at UMSL. Now, going to the faculty statistics, if we look at the percentage of African American faculty who are on the tenured or tenure track across the United States among the top 57 public universities, once again, UMSL does very well. They're at 8.1%, followed by UMKC, and Mizzou's at 31, ranked 31 at 3.5%. While there is work to do, we are higher at Mizzou than University of Florida and Purdue University, Wisconsin, and Washington. So some of the issues that we face as a university are also national issues, but there is more that we can do, and I'll talk about that just in a little bit. The next slide shows Hispanic faculty. On Hispanic faculty, the highest among the UM system universities is Mizzou at number 28 at 4.3%. But as you can see in the for the other 3 universities, we have some work to do in that regard. In order for us to be more intentional about faculty recruitment and hiring and retention, we have to really ask ourselves, are we focusing on the right universities to attract faculty members who are graduating from underrepresented groups with PhDs in diverse fields? This slide shows the number of PhD students who are African American who graduated in 2015 to 2016. The top universities for African American graduates is Howard, Jackson State, Georgia, University of Southern California, and University of Florida. For Hispanic faculty, the Hispanic PhD graduates, the top schools are CUNY in New York City, UCLA, Urbana, Stanford, and Berkeley. So if we're going to be intentional, we have to identify these as our target universities to go and recruit, and that's going to be key. But more important than that, as I've been stating on a number of occasions, if we are going to make a change, a dramatic change in diversity of our students and our faculty, we have to start building the pipeline. Without building the K through 20 pipeline throughout the United States, for which we, as a University of Missouri system, can make a dent, we will not see dramatic changes over the next decade or 2 decades. That's why we've charged our campuses, as well as working closely with Dr. Kevin McDonald, we are going to focus on K through 20 pipeline programs and the recruitment and retention of diverse faculty throughout the 4 university campuses. That's going to be key. Now, moving on to a different topic, I'm very happy to report to all of you that the applications for fall 2018 are very promising. As you can see from this slide, for freshman applications for fall of 2018, we've had the highest percentage increase at UMSL, 35% compared year over year. The highest numeric increase was at Mizzou with 2,500 additional applicants compared to last year, with an even increase in both in-state and out-of-state students. I'm also very pleased to note that compared to last year, throughout the University of Missouri system, there are now 2,300 more African American and Hispanic student applicants. These are very positive trends. With the exception of a slight dip in transfer student applications at UMSL, but keep in mind a 35% increase in freshman application, we've seen an increase in transfer student applications as well. These are very positive trends which indicate to us that we've hit an inflection point when it comes to applications and the interest from parents and students about the value that we provide for high quality, affordable education. Now, despite the excitement that is created by students and their parents, there are some areas of concern that we need to address as an institution. And that has to do with state budget. If we look at this next slide, this is a slide that I've shared with members of the legislature just to show how we compare. In fiscal year 17, the higher education per capita funding at Missouri was about $180. The national average is $265, and our border states, including both Nebraska and Arkansas, are significantly higher, in some cases double what Missouri provides. And if we look at to our west, we have Kansas at $265. Now, compounding matters for us is that this year and the past year, we've endured some cuts to our budget. And we know the reasons why, because of the state tax base and so forth. We recognize the reason. We have to do our part to contribute to the state. There's no question about that. But at the same time, we have to find ways of growing our revenue and also making sure that we operate the university with a great sense of urgency to become more efficient. It's not an either or. We have to do both. That's key. As you see from here, the proposed budget reduces our appropriations to $376 million from a high of $465 in fiscal year 17. And some of the very important collaborative programs like the Springfield Clinical Program that trains 128 medical students to practice in rural Missouri currently are not funded. I discussed with you in the previous slides the matter of state appropriation per capita. Here, I'm showing you the increase in tuition net of inflation during between 2008 and 2015. As you see from here, during that period, universities in Arizona, on average, increased their tuition by 84%. Tennessee increased it by 39%. Colorado increased by 53%. Even Kansas increased it by 23%. Where is Missouri in all of this? Missouri increased by 7.2%. We were the 4th lowest in the nation. And universities that have higher per capita expenditure in higher ed, like Nebraska and Arkansas, have increased their tuition at 18% and 16% respectively. So how does this affect education in general? When we look at the next slide, this slide shows that states that have made higher investments in higher education per capita and enabled universities to have some flexibilities in increasing tuition have seen a net increase of students coming from the state of Missouri. So in Kansas, there were 165 Missouri residents net that went from Missouri to Kansas for their education. 127 went to Arkansas, and this was in 2006. Next slide shows that the net number of students going to Kansas from Missouri increased to 305. All of the border states have seen an increase with the exception of Illinois. Thank goodness for Illinois. Other than that, we have seen a dramatic number of students leaving the state. What this causes is what is known as brain drain. And the brain drain is something that a state like Missouri cannot afford. We are partners with every member of this state to ensure that higher education provides a foundation for us to provide a better opportunity for students and better opportunity for them when they graduate to become career ready. The next slide puts the budget appropriations in context. This shows in nominal dollars the appropriations from the state. I'm sorry, it's a little hard to see, but over here, that's 2019, fiscal year 19 proposed, going all the way here, which is around 1998. So we would have to go back to 1998 to have the same amount of appropriations in nominal dollars, not in real dollars. If we were actually looking at real dollars, we would have to go back to 1970. So the universities, like University of Missouri, and I've challenged all of the leaders, we have to be efficient. We have to be efficient because every dollar that we spend on things that are inefficient is a dollar that's taken away from scholarships, dollar that's taken away from student learning and research. And that we need a sense of urgency to make sure we do that. But at the same time, I think this chart shows that we have become more efficient, but there's still more work to do. So in closing, during the past 2 years, we made a number of very hard decisions. $101 million of budget cuts and reallocations, more than 500 faculty and staff separations, but we will continue to find efficiencies, continue to consolidate programs that are meaningful to consolidate, but we need to take those savings and invest in the values that we have in student success, research, and meaningful engagement. And lastly, this is something that I've been saying since I arrived. We need to achieve excellence, but we can't cut our way to excellence. So I appreciate all of the support from members of the university and also the strong support from members of the board that's going to keep me and the leaders accountable so that we provide the resources that we need to make this university achieve excellence. Chairman Seelman, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much, President Choi. That was an excellent presentation. I'm sure there'll be some questions or comments from the board.
I've got one. Dr. Choi, thank you for that presentation. And I'm referring to the slides that showed that we weren't able to, our inability to raise, yes.
Put that microphone up close.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that good?
Good.
Okay. I'm referring to the slide where it shows that we were unable to raise tuition. My question is, I know we've raised fees over the years. Have increases in fees compensated for our inability to raise tuition? Do you understand what I'm?
Yes, I do.
Okay, yes.
No, it hasn't. I think it served as a short-term workaround, but the amount of increases in fees as a total could not compensate for the lack of ability that we had to increase tuition overall.
Other questions or comments?
So your red arrows here point to the amount of tuition increase by the schools that you highlighted as taking the most students away from the University of Missouri. Is that correct? On average, what is that tuition increase across I see 20.9% for Oklahoma, another 20% for Texas, 20% for Arkansas, 16 for Nebraska. So it's somewhere in that 15 to 20% range is the average tuition increase that our polling schools have increased their tuition by.
Right. And yes, you're right, but there are others, including Alabama and Colorado, who have been aggressively recruiting our students, and they've had more dramatic increases in tuition during that period.
On average, what is that annual tuition to each one of those? I mean,
I will calculate that for you. Where's Ryan? Ryan, we'll calculate that for you. Thank you.
and is that just in-state tuition or out-of-state tuition increases?
This is in-state tuition increases.
So it can be assumed that out-of-state tuition is even higher.
Oh, out-of-state tuition is higher. Typically, out-of-state tuition rates don't increase as much as in-state, given the concern for elasticity in the pricing. And but these are for in-state tuition.
How about numbers? Are our out-of-state students, is that increasing in numbers, decreasing, staying about the same?
It has, well, I know the figures for Mizzou because we're all concerned about the enrollment at Mizzou, and they have been decreasing in the past 2 years. But what's promising now is that the out-of-state applications have also increased for fall of 2018.
Thank you.
So if I could ask, just so I'm clear, if I look at the net students and then the tuition increases, it looks to me like we're losing students to states who are increasing the tuition faster than we are. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true. I'm not saying that that's a cause. It's not a cause and effect, but when universities like University of Alabama have higher state appropriation and the ability to increase tuition, then they can provide more resources for the students in terms of amenities, in terms of scholarships, as well as experiential learning opportunities that are expensive to operate.
Can I just add, we will bring back the information on the tuition. We've also looked at this. All of these states charge fees as well. That was something we did look at this fall, so we're not unique in terms of having fees that we assess on certain programs when we look at these surrounding states.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, and I would add what Darryl said. To me, it's helpful if we see tuition and fees. I know that you probably can't do that for every state and everything, but I think that's helpful also. Thank you.
We will provide that. Thank you.
If I could, I'll go ahead.
One more remark. What would also be interesting is, especially if the red arrows are our peer schools, that's kind of what you looked at in the map, is to see how their state funding appropriations have also trended against their tuition increases over time.
That's a great point. And in many cases, their appropriations have been decreased, and that's why they're increasing the tuition. But it is the fact that they have that flexibility to do so. In general, there are very, very few states that have seen increases in appropriations dramatically. So you are right about that.
We are in a tough spot where we don't have any levers to pull right now.
Yes, we are in a tough spot, and as I stated before, we are looking for all of the efficiency measures that we can achieve with a great sense of urgency. But when the proposed budget cuts our appropriations by $40 million, on top of the $40 million of the previous year, for us to make up $40 million just using tuition as a lever would mean that we would have to increase tuition by 17 to 18%. We would never do that to our students. We can't. That's why we're making such a strong case to the state that we need to make investments in higher ed. Thank you.
Dr. Troy, let me ask this. Have you used some of these slides when you go to Jeff City and talk to the leadership or to just individual reps and senators? You have?
Yes. In fact, my testimony on Tuesday included figures from these slides. Yes, we have. And we plan to make that presentation to the leadership again on February 12th for both the Senate and the House.
Has the response been pretty positive when you show them these numbers?
I would say that the response has been one of surprise when we share with them where we rank on a per capita higher ed spending. And supportive of the need to invest in higher education.
Go ahead, John, because you,
It's interesting that the last two on your slide that's in front of us, Illinois, we with our recent program, it's actually a net gain for us, even though they've had little increase, showing the effect of the tuition in-state for neighboring states. Kansas is also very low, but it's an outflow because last year we did not have tuition in-state for Kansas students. So we've done a fix for that, and I guess I would expect that we will see a considerable difference in the attrition from KU because of that. In terms of what we can do, we had control of that, but in terms of what we're looking for from the state, you've made a great case about the funding going down even faster in Missouri than many other states where funding also decreases. So can you prioritize for us what would be most important in helping us remain an excellent university and be even better? We've had some discussion from our lobbyists about how important it would be to have relaxation on the tuition cap. But the other aspect is whether we can maintain our core funding. It was reduced last year. We have a bit different legislature. I think the legislature has seen our efforts to be more efficient. And so can you speak to us about whether it's more important to try to maintain that core funding? If we're able to do that, is the tuition cap as important given the points that we've just made?
So the highest priority right now for us as a university is to request restoration of the core as well as the collaborative programs that we have with Springfield, Joplin, and Clay County, followed by relief from Senate Bill 389. And right now, the Senate Bill 389 has language that indicates that it would be CPI plus a 10%. We don't believe, well, we would be happy with CPI plus 5% as a cap for us. If we were to get the $40 million restored to our appropriation, we will go for just CPI as a tuition increase, as a request to the board, nothing more. So the core is that important. But I believe that requesting restoration of the core is an immediate problem that solves the issue this year. Requesting relief from Senate Bill 389 is an element that will give future boards and future presidents the flexibility to operate the university in a manageable fashion. Reacting each year to state cut appropriation and not being able to increase tuition beyond CPI will limit the ability of this university to achieve the greatness that we all want as members of the board and university administration.
So let me, I think I understand your answer, but let me ask the question another way.
Yes.
If we get even further cuts to our core, and you know, we took cuts last year from our core significantly, but if we take further cuts to our core, will the tuition cap relaxation on that, whether it's 5% or 10%, would that make up for the core cuts?
No, it won't. So the $40 million cut in appropriation will require us to increase tuition by 17 to 18%. Wow. 17 to 18%. So every 1% increase is about $2.5 million.
Thank you.
Curator Phillips, if I could, this is the president's report, which I'm injecting myself into needlessly. But there's two things to consider historically looking at the budget. So we need to be very thoughtful and careful about what it is we're trying to get and where we're trying to go. Some of the members of the board will recall early in my career, we cut a deal with the legislature and the governor that we would have no tuition increases in exchange for a increased appropriation. Do you remember that?
I do.
We didn't get that money because they can appropriate whatever amount of money they want in Jefferson City, but the money has to be there at the end of the year or we don't get it. And so when we discuss core appropriations, we are dealing with a state that has got very serious budget structural problems. I would suggest that we should think very seriously about the importance of gaining control of our own destiny with tuition flexibility. And I apologize. We have to do a better job explaining what we mean by tuition increase and what is meant. The first state up there for the highest tuition increase is Arizona. That includes Arizona State. Arizona State is one of the miracles of increasing accessibility for underserved populations, despite that high tuition increase, because what matters is how do you structure your tuition, who pays it, and how do you use it. Arkansas is picking off our best and our brightest because their tuition allows them, along with other sources of funds, to provide scholarships. We're trying to provide more Pell scholarships. So I would suggest that we all think seriously about how we explain tuition to the public and to the press. That tuition is a very complicated jigsaw puzzle, that we have revenue that we can use in a variety of innovative ways. And just to call it a tuition increase, what it is we don't have the revenue that we need to do the things that we need to do to keep the best and the brightest here and to educate our underserved populations. And so I would just say to the board and to the president, this is a new day and we have got to be more innovative and think further in the future. And you can tell that I think the tuition cap is a draconian mechanism that prevents us from being all that we can be.
Well, I agree with everything that David has said. And both are important. It would be very good to have some relief from the tuition cap. We don't have a dream of it going away. And the question is, can it be modified? But even if it is, with the current legislations, whether it's 5% or 10% above CPI, it still wouldn't make up for further cuts. We'd still be further in the hole. I think we agree.
We do agree. My concern is that we are dealing with hypotheticals because I personally don't think the state's going to have a good budget situation at the end of the year.
And the question is, where are they going to make the cuts? Last year, they made them in higher ed. This year, let's hope they don't do that.
Or where do they make the withholds? Yeah.
Yes, President Troy. The one thing, and I think other people share this concern too with the tuition increase. I think there's other ways we can go after or solve the problem with what the legislature may do, such as improving our philanthropic efforts, increasing fundraising, and also through cuts. So it makes me very worried to be able to put out there so quickly that we may raise tuition, because accessibility of college, I think, is an issue in rural Missouri as well as in the cities. And I really don't want to put up any barriers to anybody that should be going to college that can't. And so I want to get on the cuts issue. We have to increase fundraising, but on the cuts issue, I saw a slide that said $101 million of cuts. Mm-hmm. And is that over the last couple of years? Because I don't think we're making the case either that we're operating more efficiently and that we're actually making the cuts that we need to make. So $100 million in budget cuts and reallocations since when? What's the date?
That was just last year, 1 year.
Just last year. And it's $100 million, I mean, that sounds impressive, but we're dealing with, I guess, a multi-billion-dollar institution here. I'd like to see that as a percentage, or, I mean, I'm not sure what the proper context is for that number.
Our academic operations, if we put it all together, it's about $2 billion. So that's about 5%. 5% led to 500 faculty and staff separations, elimination of several programs, and also just a complete rethinking of how we operate the university. Every single unit on campus had to deal with budget cuts as well as additional workload, because the workload didn't go away. They just had to absorb more of it. And so we're very mindful of making sure that we have that we go for the efficiencies, and that's why we're doing the PwC study. But the PwC study was really motivated by our need to reinvest in the academic enterprise. And what I shared with you throughout the University of Missouri system, we've lost a lot of faculty members. And for us to become an even better research university, that is where we have to make investments. So your message is very much appreciated. We have to look at philanthropy, and I think Curator Farmers Committee is going to be very instrumental in that. We have to continue to make our university more efficient, but if we're going to be more efficient for the sake of taking the efficiency savings to cover up budget deficit, we're going to be back here 2 years, 3 years down the road and asking, why did our research go down? Why did our graduation rates go down? I don't want to be in that position, and neither do members of this board. So that is why I'm mindful of using both cuts, revenue growth, and state appropriations to operate the university in a very appropriate way.
Okay, yes, and I agree with that. Thank you, Dr. Troy. But I wonder if, you know, and I'm not sure if this is a conversation this board has had or administration has had, but I'm not sure 5%, you know, is, you know, that seems very small to me. It seems like we can push that. I'm not sure if we've agreed upon a number that we think is sufficient for the amount of administrative cuts or whatever that we can make. But 5%, $100 million looks impressive, but when you put it in percentage terms, it's not that impressive
Yeah,
to me.
I think if you ask the 500 people who lost their jobs, I think they'll say it's very impressive. And it is something that was very painful for many people. And we want to make sure that we operate the university efficiently. We don't want to cut for the sake of cutting. I can cut the budget 10%. If you tell me as a president, cut the budget by 10%, I could do it by next month. But we're going to have a university that we're not going to be proud of. We're going to see more students leaving the university because they're going to see that their services are going away, that the best faculty members are not going to be retained. So I think we got to do this in a very mindful way. Very mindful way.
Okay.
Yeah, President Choi, I'd like to say one thing. If you think about this, 80% of our budget is used for employee and employee benefits. So when you talk about a 5% cut or 10% cut, whatever you want to be, it's really cutting the heart of the university, which is the professors and the employees. It's not cutting a lot of the other stuff. It's cutting those.
And I understand that, and I sympathize for our employees, and I really do sympathize for the people that would be affected by cuts. But my number one concern are students, and if we're gonna be willing to put them out there to charge them higher tuition when they're already paying taxes to go to this university, and then we're gonna charge them tuition again, you know, I think that we have to be very mindful of that and be customer driven. I'm sorry if we have to, you know, make cuts on the university side, but I want to put our students first.
Well, when you think about it, the last 3 or 4 years, we've had thousands of employees that have not had an increase in their wages, and professors as well. And at some point, those people, they get down, they get demoralized because we haven't given them any opportunity to increase and reap any benefits. And when you continue to cut year after year, where's the opportunity to do that?
President Choi, have the cuts that were taken last year involved any sort of consulting expertise like we're getting with PwC?
No, these were done with just the leaders at the university, working with every unit and asking them what can they give up as part of the rescission. And we asked them to give us 2 scenarios where the cuts would be 8% to 12%. And they made the case to the chancellors, and chancellors identified those that which we could not afford to cut at the higher level, or those that we couldn't cut at all. So doing the PW study is the first time that, in my recollection, that this university has gone through a comprehensive approach to make the university even more efficient.
And I applaud you for doing that because I think that is very forward-thinking. But I do share Curator Chapman's concerns. I also share your concerns. We have to reinvest the money back into our academic programs. But I do think that there is a sentiment not targeted to the University of Missouri system, but to higher education generally, that they haven't run quite as efficiently or kept up with the same modern sorts of managerial strategies that you'll find in business. And I know that that's also not entirely non-controversial, but I think the point is we don't know exactly. I was sitting with some of the faculty yesterday, and the dean of the education department was describing very modern managerial practices that she had undertaken to restructure her organization, and it was not only saving money but running more efficiently. And that's a subject that I think that we don't want to lose sight of, because I hate seeing people lose their jobs, but I do agree we're here for the students. And when we're talking about working more efficiently, it isn't about just losing jobs. It's about delivering the services that I think a lot of the campuses and some of the people I've talked to have felt that the system hasn't delivered. So they've had to duplicate those resources on their own campuses and in their own colleges. So when I talk about being more efficient, that may have some repercussions of folks, unfortunately, losing their jobs in more of the administrative roles, but I'm not talking about faculty personally. And I would like to see the faculty receive the services that I think the system can and should provide to them so that they can go about their business and focus on the fine academic work that they're doing. So I just wanted to kind of reset that for some of the folks in the room, because as we talk about cuts, it isn't about, just wanting people to lose their jobs. It's about wanting us to deliver some of the services that I think that the academics are entitled to be receiving so that they can focus on the academics.
Curator Bernstein, would you suggest, and I'm asking you this, that maybe the word cuts is not accurate, it's more accurate to call it a restructuring?
I would call it an integration. Ryan and I have talked about this a bit, because shared services is actually a wholly different thing for those in, the McKinseys and the consulting arms. And at Express Scripts, we've done shared services. It's integration. You're talking about a duplication of resources that don't necessarily have clear reporting lines up through the main financial and HR channels that you have at the system level. And if you look at it as a holding company type of model, you may have a lot of different sites and facilities, but those reporting chains connect into the people that are in finance as opposed to, the people that are just on site at those facilities. What we're talking about is a centralization and integration here. Shared services is when you take something and you treat it more like an operation. So you may have the same type of work, and you start using big data and aggregating the types of questions that you're receiving into your HR offices. And some of those, I needed my W-2, the common questions that you're going to get over and over and over, you provide an application on your website, your intranet, that your employees can access and get the information that they need without actually, using any human time, so that the humans can focus on the more novel types of issues as opposed to the repeated ones. So we've taken more and more into shared services as we've been able to aggregate the data and the types of questions that people have, and it's created efficiencies because nobody's waiting. People are getting the answers that they need much more quickly, but that's what a shared service is treating something that's in a repeatable.
And the reason, I'll get to Curator Phillips, I wanted to bring that up because there have been cuts made. I think we tend to adopt the word cuts that I'm not sure, and Curator Farmer has brought this up
Reallocation, I think, is what we'd
Yeah,
like to say.
and so I think it's important, particularly with the press and faculty and people who are sitting out there, to understand there is no one up here who is in favor of having less money into educating our children and our workforce, that I know of. If they are, they can speak for themselves. But we are in favor of moving resources to places that we think we need it, particularly classrooms and labs. And so, and I bring that up so that they understand Curator Chapman, Curator Burnsick, Curator Phillips are on a task force with all the chancellors where we will be getting into the service models and duplications of services. In addition, the Finance Committee, which you chair, will be looking at issues like tuition, which again, I obviously don't do a good job of explaining that tuition is not a real number. It is that net tuition and financial services are part of a package. Those are matters that I know you're taking very seriously and that you recognize are complicated issues that are not necessarily susceptible to sound bites.
So can I make a comment? I think Julia is actually correct, and it's good to have on the board the expertise of business owners like Julia and Jamie Farmer. And the perception in the state has been, you know, that the university has not taken advantage of shared services. And President Choi, when you said that, you know, we haven't had a study, we actually are in process, and it is the PwC study that will lead us in that direction. That's really a good introduction for hopefully what we're going to have is the critical issues discussion, maybe at our next meeting, but certainly in the next several months. So it isn't that we haven't worked with the cuts, but when you get a cut like we did last year, you have to do it here and now. It has to be implemented for this school year. And the only report of the 4 campuses that we've seen so far that I'm aware of is the Columbia campus report that came out maybe last week. They've demonstrated how much work they've put in, and this isn't necessarily linked to the PwC process. I mean, that's longer term, and will have more profound changes on the structuring of the system. But in the near term, that report, if you'll read it, and you'll see the kinds of cuts that we're making this year on this campus and on the other campuses, it is people, it is programs, it is degrees that we're eliminating, and maybe many of them properly so. If you have 6 people in a class, maybe that class doesn't need to be taught, or maybe it needs to be taught with distance learning, taking into account all 4 campuses. So I really think that the Columbia campus has gone through a model that we all should read to see the process that they've gone through and what the other campuses are going through. So my belief is that out of crisis often comes good. And we've been in crisis because of the cuts, and we're making some changes that I think the legislature and the governor will be appreciative of. But it's going to take a while to do it. And frankly, the PwC, I was really gratified when they came to us and explained it. I buy into that. I hope it doesn't result in as many programs and degrees being cut. I hope that it results in some greater economies to scale as we do some restructuring with some real expert advice. So I'm optimistic about the steps we're taking, but I do agree that we're just starting that process, and actually we're just starting 1/4 of that process, because when you look back at the graph they presented us, that's the first step out of 4 to make us more efficient. I think we'll be appreciated over time by our legislature. I hope in the meantime we don't have to do some more near-term cuts of programs in people and professors that affect the students. That's my hope.
Other questions?
The only thing
comments?
I would add to that is that, this is a process, and this process has been going on for some time, and it will continue. And Darrell, I agree that we have to make sure that we protect the students. But I think we also need to, and I think we are, And I think that our leadership is very carefully looking at what point the cuts, just picking out a percentage, whatever percentage you want to pick, what percentage would hurt the student because of an effect on the institution, effect on the faculty, effect on those things that students need to get the education that we've promised to give them. So this is a process that we're not going to solve at this meeting or probably even the next meeting, but I think all of us are committed. I think all of us are committed over the years ahead that all of us have to work on exactly what we're talking about here. And it's going to be a challenge, but it's a challenge that we're heading in the right direction on. Wouldn't you agree, Chairman Steele?
No, there's no question. We need to give ourselves some credit. We're more than heading in the right direction. And I want to go back to the Finance Committee and Ryan Rapp's undertaking of this, whether I call it restructuring or Julia properly calls it, what is it again? Integration.
Integration.
Yeah, and that's headed down the road, and I think, Ryan, everybody needs to understand you're going to be coming first to the Finance Committee and then to the board with some very serious decisions and getting the necessarily external help to make real issues. So we are more than just starting the process. We are deep into a process that we are committed to seeing through to the end that may be one of the most fundamental undertakings of any university in the country. And I do think we should give ourselves credit for being on the leading edge of understanding that the American university was tremendously successful, but we became victims of our own success, and we were patting ourselves on the back. The world changed on us. But we are undertaking the challenges of moving where the world is.
President Choi,
Yes.
I'd like to ask also back to the PwC thing. What, do we know what that range, remind me the range, how much we can save?
The range that they identified was about 40 million to about 70 million.
40 to 70, and that's yearly, correct? That's an
That's-
annual savings?
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's, to me, I think we spend a lot of time talking about how much money we can get from the legislature, which is understandable. We spend a lot of time talking about how much tuition. I think and that's understandable. I think we have to focus on how we spend that money, because I don't believe, and Julia said it, Daryl said it, I believe there's a lot of ways to improve efficiency, and I believe this PwC process is critical, and I think it's going to make a lot of changes. But I guess, have we looked at, let's get away from the cuts and the restructuring and stuff. What about creative revenue streams? Have we exhausted that, or are we just starting that process?
No,
Are there other
we've not
opportunities?
exhausted that. So we have to look at philanthropy. We have to look at other opportunities, including the topic that's going to come up later, which is increasing our online presence for education, developing more public-private partnerships when it comes to research. All of these things have to be done. And there's not going to be an avenue that we're not going to be seeking that may turn out to be beneficial for us. But philanthropy is going to be key for us moving forward. And as Ryan stated yesterday, and as I stated in my remarks, we will move with urgency when it comes to becoming more efficient and reducing the redundancy. But the important thing is for us to make those investments in where it's most needed at the university. And I just want to go back to the three topics that I've been talking about since I joined: student success, research breakthroughs, and effective engagement.
Thank you.
I'm not going to cut this off because this is a very important discussion. I want to make sure everybody's had their chance to weigh in.
Well, I want to add to Julia's remarks that we want to drive these operational efficiencies, but the end goal in mind, as I've been listening to the faculty speak, is to give them more time so they can employ their resources more successfully. And so I think part of what we should add potentially, and I don't know if it's quantifiable, is hopefully these PwC initiatives reduce, give us cuts of 40 to 70 million, but our faculty gets X more time to go invest themselves in gaining research dollars. It's about empowering our people, really, then I just want to see we're just trying to dial back. That's at least my goal in all of this, and I do think having this new committee, we will try to reach out and work with advancement in marketing and figuring out more creative revenue sources. I know I've been internally on a bandwagon about creating 529 plans, so our students here in the state of Missouri come down the road 18 years later with a little piggy bank to spend on education. I think that's something we have a real opportunity to partner with the state with to get in front of. So we're increasing the new revenue that's going to be coming into this college or other colleges throughout the state down the road. So I'm excited for this new committee, and just want everybody to know that we are excited to drive academic excellence, and that's the end goal in mind here.
And incentives. I mean, I really strongly believe in financial incentives and pay increases and pay for performance, and we want to get there so that the faculty get raises.
So,
More equipment,
I-
certainly.
I'd like to point out that we had up on the screen briefly yesterday, it didn't say PwC, but it was the four-part process that we've bought into, I think, as a board. And to get back to one of the questions, are we looking at other revenue sources? That's one of the other parts of the 4 parts. It's called Revenue Enhancement, Development, and Partnership Opportunities. But the one that we're currently on is the operational efficiency that Julia has talked about. But we got to keep in mind that the goal of a lot of that isn't to give us additional resources. That goal and the 40 to 70 million is to keep from being in a hole of much more than that over a 4-year, 5-year program. So it's more of a question of becoming efficient so that you're not running a deficit, which we can't do. So when we talk about reinvesting, it's becoming more efficient and making sure that we're using the reduced income that it appears we're going to have based on state support.
Could I add just one very important thing, which I don't think can be emphasized enough, which Ryan has emphasized to me all the time? You had up the 4 issues. To be a great university, we have to hit each of those 4. I want to say that again so that everybody understands. And Ryan, why don't you, again, what are those 4 that we have to hit?
So we've got to be able to, revenue enhancement, revenue growth, operational efficiency, administrative efficiency is number 2. Number 3 is resource allocation. How do we utilize the resources we have? And then academic excellence or academic productivity is the 4th.
It is not 3 of the 4 or 2 of the 4. We have to hit each of those 4 to do what we need to do for this university and this state. I have one question to both Jamie and Dr. Choi, myself. And this was my fault when we were talking about this new committee. I've been made aware that a lot of universities make broader use of public-private partnerships than we do. Can we also, Curator Farmer and Dr. Choi, aggressively engage in looking at what other universities do and how we might take more advantage of public-private partnerships?
Absolutely. I think it'd be very interesting to pull that data together to understand where we stand compared to our peers.
Dr. Choi?
Yes, and we also have on that committee leaders like Alexander Cartwright who've led public-private partnerships at the SUNY system. And I think working with those companies like Roche or Thermo Fisher that want to enhance our research capabilities would be a great way to start.
Right. Any more questions on this? I want to make sure everybody has had an opportunity. To the board, thank you very much. That was, I thought, a very good discussion. Dr. Choi, thank you very much. I think, Dr. Cartwright, you're up, if I'm correct.
Alex, if he had hit a couple more shots last night, we'd have won that game.
So we're not
Thank you.
going into executive session? We are. But, I mean, we're going to go through all those first.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to spend a little bit of time today to talk about some of the things going on in Mizzou. This talk is actually going to be a little bit different than an update in that really it is, it sort of gets to my philosophy of how we move forward as an institution. And I'm a big believer that Can you hear it?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that you can't get to where you want to be if you don't know where you are. And so you'll see in this talk where we are, and we'll talk about a number of things. We have a lot of things going on at Mizzou this spring semester. We have the strategic planning effort that's underway. We have the administrative review, climate survey, how we're responding to that. We have to think about our budget changes. We have strategic enrollment management. We have yield campaigns that are thinking about how we get more enrollment. We have the academic program review taking place. We're rethinking economic development, research, academic excellence, all in one semester. So there's a lot of things that are coming together, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those specifically, but I want to give you a flavor for what's happening at the university, because I do believe that it's important that people understand what an AAU public research university does in a state. If you look at everything that I've been talking about up until now, I've talked about us as the University for Missouri. And you'll notice one change in this slide, too, to emphasize, is that it is for Missouri and beyond, because we do things that impact the world. And I want us to emphasize that that is what we're about. If you look at this university, research, AAU, public, it's a land-grant institution, and it's also a member of the SEC. And we need to be thinking, and in the Midwest, and we need to be thinking about what does that mean for where we want to go, and how do we make a great institution exceptional. To me, it's about innovation. And innovation means you have to rethink the things that you're doing, do them differently, think about what resources you have, and really invest them in the right way. As an institution, of course, that's around 4 main things for me. That is teaching, creative research and creative activities, our engagement, and also our economic development. And I'm going to take us through a little bit of that. But first, I want to emphasize that whatever we do, we need to realize that it's our people that make us exceptional. It's our exceptional students, faculty, staff, alumni, all of the supporters we have, and our friends who help and support this institution in so many ways. So it's bringing those people together and enabling what they can do. And today's talk, I'm going to focus on a few things. I'm going to focus on student success, research and creative activities, engagement and extension, and all of that you'll see is really how do we affect lives, how do we improve lives. Towards the end, I'll spend a little bit of time on what we're doing in philanthropy, because I know that has come up multiple times. So if we look at student success at Mizzou, it really, for us, it is about how do we prepare the future leaders? How do we think about giving them the experiences? And you heard some of that in the last couple of days. You heard about the experiences of students being able to go and learn something new, being able to do things hands-on, having opportunities to get global experiences. These are the things that we think are important, and you notice a lot of that is in addition to what we do in the academic environment. So we have to come up with ways that we can support extracurricular activities. And we have high-quality students that come to Mizzou. We have a lot of people who come here really and just transform. Even at this morning's breakfast, you heard about students transforming professors' lives. That happens, and we transform their lives. And we have students that are incredibly successful in national competitions, and we want even more of them here. When we talk about improving and making them, getting them to be exceptional, it is around the things that we value. It's experiential learning, student services, reducing that time to completion, and allowing us to reduce the total cost of education. Because one of the things that's critical, and President Choi has been saying this, and I've been talking to people about this too, is that it's important for you to understand that the cost of education is a little more complicated than people sometimes think. People sometimes focus on a one-year cost, but that cost is actually over 4 years if you can graduate in 4 years, or it might be 5 years, or it might be 6 years. And institutions that have low graduation rates and low retention rates, then the cost of education increases even if their tuition is lower than ours. So we need to be thinking about what's the entire services that you provide, and it is about what you're doing for your students and how you allow them to go out and be most successful. So those student services become really important, and we need to emphasize those. We also need to be thinking about what is it that our students are looking for. A part of academic program review, we're not just thinking about what should we cut, what isn't performing the best, but also where's the future going. And this is just an example, one example I want to give you of how things have changed, and this is from the Arts and Science group, and the creation of a School of Visual Studies, which really brought together art history, film studies, and digital storytelling. And the number that's important in here is to realize that this digital storytelling, for example, started in 2015, and really wanted to hit a 5-year target of about 46 students, and within 2 years is already at 158 students and expanding. Because this is something that the students were looking for. This is something that the public is looking for, and something that can easily be transferred out into the things that you're doing. Student success also is with our leadership opportunities. And being a member of the SEC is something that does allow us to add tremendous leadership opportunities for our athletes. And if you look at our athletic programs, you'll see that we have a number of programs now ranked in that top 25 nationally. And I think this is indicative of the type of athletic program we want to run. And we're looking at how do these student athletes then be successful moving forward. And I think that is what, again, we're about. There was questions about how do we support some of these activities, and can we go with philanthropic help? And for the, in many cases, in almost all of the cases, philanthropists are interested in the value add, they're interested in excellence, they're interested in seeing what they can do to transform people's lives. And that is, an example is given here, is really talking about the work of Chern's scholars and their donation to our school, which is a $1.5 million gift to the Honors College, which again adds value, builds out a program that allows us to really think about excellence. And all of our donors are about excellence and how do they provide those opportunities. Another example is what we did with our student success is the Hummel Family Foundation, which gave us a grant which I had the honor of actually announcing $2,500 scholarships to 200 students, and we did it as a surprise. They didn't know they were going to get this. They just thought they were being called to come and see the chancellor, and I'm sure some of them were wondering, what is this about? But we really announced a great program, again, supported by tremendous philanthropists. And that is paying off in that all of those efforts, what you're starting to see is what we're doing in new affordability and accessibility measures, the things we're doing with the Border State scholarships, Black and Gold scholarships, land grant scholarships, ROTC scholarships, our reduction of dorm rates, our board programs, and all of the cost savings that we're thinking about. How do we build a program that can really help reduce the total cost of education for our students? We have the second highest retention rates of 87% last year. I want to see that go higher, even higher. And we also have successful outcomes that are over 90%, which is some of the highest in the AAU and the SEC. And we should be proud of all of these things here. One example is Kaffner, when they run their fair for employers, 200 companies show up looking for our students. And that is a tremendous number you should think about. And we are doing a lot in strategic enrollment. It was mentioned earlier that our applications are up, and we expect that they'll continue to increase. And when we add in all of the new affordability initiatives, and when we think about how we restructure for student success, and it will require some changes, and sometimes you need those investments ahead of time to really be able to gain the efficiency. So we have to figure out how do we invest now to gain the efficiencies down the road. It's hard to do that while all you're thinking about is cutting. I wanted to give a quick update on where we are with our marketing and advertising activities. 160/90 has been involved with us quite a bit over the last semester, and really, I think, moving us in a direction that's going to talk about the excellence of Mizzou. And I think it's helped a lot with the things that we've seen in terms of the improvement in the attitude and the thoughts about Mizzou. We're doing a lot of things we didn't do before that you can see some of the highlights on here. In terms of research and creative activities, I want to say that Mizzou is second to none. We have incredible, incredible faculty, and I think that's sometimes lost when we start worrying so much about all of the things that are happening with the budget and what's going on. And I think I want to keep us focused on the fact, and it was said very well earlier by Curator Brunswick, that this is about how do we enable and have our faculty have the opportunity to do the things that are really productive. Our faculty think about things beyond just what they're doing in the classroom and educating students. They work with our students and think about how are we shaping politics, history, society in general? How do we enrich our lives through the arts and humanities? What are we doing to solve the world's grand challenges? These are the things we want our faculty, who are just amazing individuals, to be thinking about, that will then engage with our community and transform Missouri and beyond. But we have to provide that environment, and we have to make sure that we're not losing them to other institutions that will come in and take the best and the brightest. And we've seen that happening over the last 5 years, and that's something that I'm learning and something that we need to address very quickly. And it means you have to think about how you allocate those resources. The faculty thought leadership, I just thought I'd put some of these numbers up there because they're interesting for you to see at Mizzou. You know, we have 6 National Academy of Inventor members and National Academy of Sciences, a lot of faculty awards, many books published over a 10-year period. And I have to tell you that we don't know these numbers accurately. We know this is the lower end of these numbers. And if you look at the articles published in the last, say, 4 years or so, 7,000, this is an important number of citations, which represent whether people are actually interested in what you're publishing or not. And we have well over 83,000 citations to that. So people are noticing the work being conducted at Mizzou, and we want to make sure that we even have better faculty here, additional faculty, who can really drive these numbers even higher, raise the prestige of Mizzou, raise our standing in the AAU, and make sure that we're having the impact that we want to have. Now, everything isn't rosy. If you look at our research expenditure trends, we've been flat or decreasing now for a while, and I think that we need to be doing some things differently. You can't just keep doing the same thing and expect different results. You need to do some things differently, and we have been doing some things differently, because I want to show you our research awards, and you'll start to see that in this year we've started to get more awards than we have in the past year. That will translate into coming years that we'll have more research expenditures. But I believe that our potential is just, it's not unlimited, but it's pretty close. We have incredible ability to raise these numbers, and I would hope and I want us to double those research expenditures in 5 years. And I have many reasons that I believe we can do that. Many reasons in terms of just looking at the institution, what's the capacity, what types of things we can do. And it is going to come down to how do we ensure that our faculty have the opportunity to do those things. Animal sciences, for example, I think you should know this, I want you to know this one, is number 1 in terms of our expenditures in the country. Okay, so this is an incredible program, very well respected, and we want to do more. The TPMC is one example where I know some of you have seen this before, that we talk about engineering coming together with medicine, coming together with vet med, and coming together now, you might be seeing this for the first time, with agriculture and natural resources, CAFNR, and arts and science. There's a lot of opportunity for all of these faculty from these different disciplines to come together. You were talking about public-private partnerships. The TPMC will not be successful if we don't think about how we bring partners into the TPMC, both private partners and also governmental partners in terms of the VA. They need to come together. We all need to be sharing those facilities. That's then going to lead to all of the breakthroughs that we want. and the economic development that we really want to see. That's going to lead to precision medicine that's going to change people's lives. It's going to lead to new companies, therapeutics, new materials. We will be a leader in this area if we decide, if we invest strategically and make sure that we put those in place. I want to talk a little bit, and this is all going very briefly, but very quickly, but I wanted to make sure you get a flavor of the way that I think about this. I want to talk a little bit about engagement and economic development. Because to me, engagement and economic development is well beyond just what we do, and we typically talk about extension. Extension is wonderful, but there's more to it than that. If we think about, some of you saw this slide last night, if you think about what we're doing in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, it's how do we rethink the institution so that everybody understands that there's an opportunity for you to take your ideas, translate them out into industry, produce something that is useful for society. And it starts to make people think about, how do I take my basic science, something that I'm really passionate about, but think about how it impacts people's lives. And that's what we are doing here with this rethinking of the economic development and the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We've been fairly successful already. We have a number of companies that have been translated, a number of companies that are starting to get funds raised, and this will grow as we start to build the ecosystem even further. It's about entrepreneurs in residence. It's about the ecosystem within the institution, building and allowing students to participate in this activity, students at the undergraduate and graduate level, as well as our faculty, and enabling opportunities for them to do this. And I think we're starting to see some of that activity in terms of what we're doing in our research. These are over 5 years. It's about $1 billion that we've contributed to the economy, and that amplifies in terms of actual economic impact. Fee-for-service revenues is using some of our facilities, and also then some of the licensing that we see from the technologies. These are things that happen outside of what we're doing. And we want to make sure that when we're doing this, we're thinking about what's happening throughout the state, listening to Missourians, talking about MU's visibility, interacting with lawmakers. And there's a lot of numbers on here, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but I gave them to you just so you have them. But it's all of the different companies that are produced as a result of connecting with us, the type of economic impact, percentage increases in sales, all of the things that we should be thinking about. But a number you should think about is 36,000 people visiting our ag research centers across Missouri each year. This is a big impact on the state. And more importantly, if you look at the amount of money that's invested, on the order of 11, for every dollar, about $11 is returned. So we have $945 million impact for a fairly modest budget in extension. So this is a type of things that we should be thinking about and making clear to people. And then engagement goes beyond that. It is about MU healthcare. And there's a lot of numbers on this slide, but it's a number of patients, it's the lab test, it's all of this translates into economic development for the state, jobs for the region, and all of the things that we want to do. And if you look at our growth over the last 7 years, this is significant in that we had about a 20% market share, and in 25 county service area, it just continues to increase to we're up to 28%. And I expect that that's going to continue as a trend, and we want that to continue as a trend. Total impact of $3 billion in that activity, and it's one that we continue to work on. So there's a lot going on in student success, research, and economic development and engagement, and there was set up very well this morning to talk about philanthropy and what we might be able to do there. And I really do want to just take a little bit of time and show where Mizzou is in terms of philanthropy. We had over the years, we started with campaigns that were modest, went up to 600 million, and then now we have a campaign that's $1.3 billion, of which we've raised already $987 million. And it's our time to lead campaign. And that campaign is focused on areas that we believe drive our excellence. and that is endowment, right? The endowment is important because even though it looks like a really big dollar amount, we only use a portion of that because we need to make sure it's evergreen and we can continue to be able to fund really areas driving excellence over time. And that means that needs to be there for us to use. Campus renaissance. We've been spending a lot of effort, expending a lot of energy on how do we bring in the funds that are needed to change our campus and allow us to do the things we want to do, infrastructure that really does enable the activities that we want to be enabling. Signature centers and institutes. Which areas do we think we can become world-class in? And how do we do that? And that's something that we need to focus on. And one of the things that I added is really in the last 6 months is for us to focus on student success. And how do we really explicitly say we need to find dollars there that are going to make sure that we reach that goal amount that we haven't established yet, but we really want us to emphasize. We've been successful. These are some of the centers that you've seen around here, and almost $100 million invested in those centers. You know these: the Kinder Institute, the John Murray Center for Documentary Journalism, the Novak Leadership Institute, which we announced last fall, the Thompson Center, which had another expansion last fall, and again is growing the things that we're doing and making us a leader really in what's going on in autism and neurodevelopmental disorders around the country, and of course the Reynolds Journalism Institute. These are just a sampling of some of the things that are happening at Mizzou and some of the things that we continue to do. We've had success in capital campaign. We have raised money for the School of Music building, the South End Zone project, $50 million, Laffrey Hall renovation, $6.4. We recently raised $5 million for the journalism school. So we've made a lot of progress, and we continue to make progress in this area. In the School of Nursing, we've raised $3 million. So we'll continue to go along that path, and we continue to emphasize that. And our endowment is growing, and it's grown rapidly to where we're over $1 billion, which we mentioned in the fall. But I think it's important that you understand where we are in the context of the AAU, the SEC, and in the state of Missouri. Mizzou has done a great job in these areas, and I think we will continue to grow. We're not the absolute top, but we're not bad. So this is in the SEC. We're in the middle of the pack in terms of our endowment, and that's actually fairly good. In the AAU, we have a ways to go, but we're still ahead of some pretty good institutions, Maryland, Georgia Tech, Irvine. And we will continue to move forward because we have the alumni and the supporters that we think will make us even more successful once they realize the commitment that we have to excellence and that we are committed to moving this institution forward in a way that's going to allow us to become that world-class Midwestern institution that is the best of the best. That is our goal. We don't want to settle for less than that. And this is where we stand within the state. So our endowment is here. We're about $1 billion. And I think that it is reflective of the types of things that this institution is achieving. I will end there, but I wanted to say a few other things. I think you've seen that really revenue enhancements, efficiency, resource allocation, and academic excellence is what people were talking about. And I hope you realize through this talk that all of what I've been mentioning has elements of all of those, and we're thinking about everything that we can do there. There is how do we find the funds to be able to do some of these things? What are we doing in philanthropy? How can I encourage larger center-type grants? I haven't talked about that much today because I'm giving a talk February 26th where I'll spend a lot more time talking about how we go much more aggressively after research grants and how we find the dollars to be able to do those things. Resource reallocation, how do we think about what funding we have internally to focus that towards excellence? The TPMC is one of those examples, and I think we will really be able to do some interesting things there. And in terms of efficiencies, I recently announced that I was looking for 3 different faculty fellows to help in my office One of them was focused on institutional effectiveness, is what I call it. And this is how do we become completely data-driven as an institution to drive the excellence in our faculty, the outcomes we want in our students, how we serve this community. It's important that we have a mechanism and the ability to track, see where we are. And that is beyond just quantitative numbers, but it's really thinking about what does it mean to drive excellence? What does it mean to have the economic impact on your community? Strategic partnerships. What's the opportunities there in terms of working with industry, in terms of working with other institutions, community colleges? To me, all of that is part of what we do, and we need to be thinking about how we do that strategically. And then also I have a faculty fellow that I'm looking for in strategic initiatives. So how do we as an institution pick areas of strength, grow those areas of strength, look at areas that have the potential to grow but might be weak right now, and then how do you expand those? So those are the things that we're doing. It's a lot of different things, and I didn't spend a lot of time on all the specific details, but I wanted you to get a flavor of the progress that we're making in understanding this institution and moving the institution forward. The last thing that I would say that is critical to all of this is that you have to create a culture of innovation, and you have to create a culture of excellence. And that is what we're driving towards more than anything. I want our faculty to know that my biggest goal is to see that they can achieve their greatest dreams in the scholarly activities that they have. I want to see our faculty, I want to see our students be successful in whatever it is that they want to do. And we're going to break down any barriers that are in the way of that happening. And that is why I feel so strongly that, Mizzou is such a great institution for faculty to come to and for students to come to, because if you want to think about the university of the future, this is where it's going to be created. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Cartwright, thank you. That was a remarkable presentation, and we get caught up in our difficulties and challenges, and it is good for you as well as those students that we saw this morning to remind us we are fortunate enough to serve a great university with a great future, and I appreciate your efforts. Any questions or comments by the board?
Yes, I echo those sentiments from Curator Stillman. Alex, you talked a lot about our endowment, growth of our endowment. I think that's wonderful. I know that an endowment is very important to higher ed institutions. But when we're facing a financial crisis, how do we use our endowment at all, any of the money there to fill in those holes?
So, that's one of the things that we have to be, you have to realize is that the endowment is really, those are targeted funds for excellence in very specific areas, and we use any revenue generated off of that endowment in particular areas. So it's not a fund we can just easily tap into. Mm-hmm. It's a fund for very specific activities. Now, what we need to make sure of is that anytime we're raising funds, that the things that we're going after are well aligned with where we want to go as an institution. And that is what we're doing. Yeah. So we're thinking about what are we doing in capital, what are we doing in our student success, scholarships. All of this are the things that we're thinking of. That allows us to create that environment of excellence that I want, that culture of innovation, that culture of excellence, endowments for faculty that can live on perpetually to allow them to do the research activities that they need to do, endowed chairs. It's a lot of things like that that then really allow us to attract the best and brightest faculty and then to support our students in ways that we can't easily off of tuition or other funding.
Okay.
So it's really supplementary to the things that we're doing as the core of the institution, and we try to go out and find additional funds to be able to do all of that.
And where are we year to date in this fiscal year as far as fundraising goes? What kind of number we got for MU?
I know Tom is here. Tom, where are we right now as of today? Tom Miles can say it. And cash receipts is what he's asking.
So we had, the first 6 months in cash was by far our best 6 months ever in our history. So we finished that 6-month period with about about $70 million in cash. And so that represented about a 33% increase over last year. Now, we also track cash and pledges for total productivity, and that's what you see. And that includes what we have in the entire campaign. So we had a very excellent year. Some of it was related to the market. Some of it is that we've been aggressively going out and talking with donors, but we're in a very good position at this point in the fiscal year.
Is that money restricted? I guess when I hear those kind of numbers, you know, I just wonder how can that fit into helping us with our financial crisis?
Yeah.
I mean,
to Alex's point, 98% of our dollars raised are restricted.
Right.
Chancellor has a Chancellor's Fund that has over $12 million in unrestricted support for excellence. Each of the deans have some unrestricted dollars. But having said that, many of those dollars go to scholarships for students. Many of those dollars go to faculty for faculty support. So those offset dollars that deans and the university would have to spend in other areas. Okay. So it has a direct impact, but it's not sitting in a pool saying, hey, let's designate it for this tomorrow.
okay. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Cartwright. Are you and Tom working together to identify those public-private partnerships, especially for the TMPC and moving forward there? Do you have your target list that you two are jointly going after?
Yes. We've been thinking about what is it, so there's a few things here. One is you have to step back a little bit and say exactly what do we want to accomplish in the TPMC? What is that precision medicine? Then you have to identify who are the partners that could be the most interested in that area, and then we go and start having conversations with them. We do the same thing with our individual donors that might be interested in it, and then with industry partners that might be interested in it. Tom has hired Robert Driver, right? That's Driver? Yes. Is he here? He's there. He is, yes. Sorry, Robert, didn't remember it for sure. But we have someone who's really thinking about partnerships with industry and how do we then expand on those. And yes, you have to know the potential industry partners that would be interested in that, and then talk to them about what you're trying to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Chancellor Cartwright, when you meet with them along those lines, are you also taking into consideration our capital improvements budget and the 5-year plan and so on, so that the most important things, are you trying to put those out there first and
Absolutely.
to entice them to, this is the one we really need right now?
Yeah. I mean, yes. We have, I mean, we're pretty, I don't know a better way to say this, we're pretty sophisticated in this. We know, we would generally know about the donors, what their interests are potentially, and we think through that, and we have conversations with them to understand better what they might be interested in. And then we talk to them about what the potential is in areas that are related. And of course, the things that we think about are what are our highest priorities in terms of capital, in terms of scholarships, in terms of faculty, in terms of any of the signature centers that we're interested in. It is a conversation that we have with them. And donors are I mean, we have some incredible people that have been very generous to this institution. And you'll see that they generally have truly great insight into what could distinguish this institution. The Novak Leadership Institute, for example, is something that has put us on the map in terms of leadership. The Kinder Institute for Constitutional Democracy is something, again, that has put us really at the forefront in terms of constitutional democracy, not only in that area, but at the right time in the history of this country. So I think that there are opportunities where we think about the general excellence of our institution, how we create centers that can identify this institution nationally and globally and get the recognition we need. And our donors are really savvy in terms of what types of things are needed out there. And so we work with them, and we've been blessed actually in many ways to have such tremendous supporters.
You know, I think we're aware, the curators are, that you and Tom make a lot of trips, various places. You have to meet with those alumni in various other places.
Yes.
And with all your work here, is it possible to give some of that work, and maybe it can't be done, Are you and he kind of the only ones that do this, or we got other people reaching out, trying to make those kind of contacts and trying to reach those public-private partnerships as well?
We have a tremendous team. We have a team of people. All of our deans are expected to do fundraising. A number of our senior staff at the vice chancellor's level get involved when we get into certain types of discussions about different programs. We work with our provost. We work with everybody in terms of everybody's involved. It's an all hands on deck team effort.
But you and Tom kind of meet that out and
Yes,
decide exactly what the plan is and who's going to meet with who and so forth.
Yes, we work through all of this in terms of what we should be doing, because I do have limited time, but for some of the bigger efforts, some of the real potential that I think could transform Mizzou, it's important that I carve out the time to be thinking about where the institution's going and how we could chart a path forward with the right investments, the right donations that could really transform this institution and leave a lasting impression in the country and in the world. So I need to be cognizant of the fact that how important philanthropy is, so that I'm spending the time that really is needed there and spending the time on the right efforts. So yes, we work through all of that.
Let me mention one other thing. I think all the curators would welcome the opportunity to help you and Tom or anybody else on your staff, and if there are people in our areas which you're going to see that you think we might be helpful.
Yeah, sure.
And on the other hand, don't invite us if you think we're going to hurt you. But I think, you know, we'd be happy to sit in on meetings and
Yes.
give our 2 cents worth and help you in that regard.
Many of you have already been incredibly, all of you have already been incredibly helpful in just showing the support that we need people to see for Mizzou, and having people understand that you value what Mizzou is doing as an AAU public research institution, and that you want to see us continue to advance and improve in the AAU. It is about the distinctiveness and differentiation of Mizzou and what we have to offer that I think attracts people to this great institution. And your support in those efforts is, I think, what really helps us tremendously. And I've seen many of you at various Jeff Club events and others, and I really thank Missouri 100. I thank all of you for showing up at all of those events, because that helps us tremendously to have you there as supporters. They understand that you know what the institution's trying to do, and that they feel comfortable then that the institution's going in the right direction. So thank you for all you've done that.
If I could just emphasize too, because a change is always something you got to get used to. We do have the new committee chaired by Curator Farmer to deal with external, not just relations, but also development. And Curator Farmer has said to me privately, her goal is to add value to your efforts and to be an asset to you. So it'll take us a while to get used to that committee existing, but I hope that we integrate as quickly as we can.
Sure, sure. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Looking forward to working with you.
Yes, thanks.
In that regard, I was struck by Tom Heil's comment that 98% of our endowment fund or our fundraising is restricted, meaning that our donors have done it in a manner that it's targeted for specific projects,
Yes.
often endowed projects. but
Yes.
Also, capital improvements sometimes. So you're going through a strategic planning process, each campus is, which will come together, whether it's a refresh or totally new. And the task force that you just completed on the Columbia campus
Yes.
has at the very end, I can't remember what the caption is, but it's like investment opportunities.
Yes. Yeah.
And it identified those areas which I trust will be shown in your strategic plan draft, like data
Big data,
collection,
yes.
Organization, ability to analyze, like improving distance learning opportunities, and recently announced Jim Spain's work on a student success, how students learn. So how are you and the other campuses going to translate that into readable material so that our committee and Tom Hiles can let the public know and our alumni know what our strategic needs are.
Yeah.
So when they're thinking of making a contribution, they may have a list of those ideas and not be thinking about having a dormitory named after them, but rather a student success center named after them or something like that.
It's a great question. I was going to say you must have a bug in my office or something, because this is a conversation Tom and I just had. Was it earlier this week, Tom? Because what we're talking about is how do we simplify the presentation to donors in terms of where we're going. What we are working on is a one-page, big idea type presentation. And we're working on how that would be structured, because it is important that you get across all of the key information in a single page. A graphic, here's what we're going to do. But also it's important that people understand the different components of that idea and how much each of those components might cost. Because sometimes people may not want to, they can't, I'd love to be able to find a donor who'd just do the whole TPMC, but that's going to be a challenge. But there are components in there that people might really identify with and say, I'd really love to be able to do this because it's going to have an impact on cancer research. We need to have an easy way to get that message across to everybody, and we're working on a template that will allow us to do that. So yes, we are thinking, take the big ideas, move those big ideas into simple one-page things that we then hand out. We already do some of this. We have handouts and different things that we translate the big idea into something that's like a booklet or that we hand to people. But I think it's even more important that we get that down into a more concise manner so it's easy for people to flip through. And we're going to be doing this for all of our bigger ideas and how we make sure people understand what we are looking to do as an institution.
Well, that's a great plan, and I realize that when you actually go for an ask, you often have some inclination of what somebody might be interested in. But to have a one-page or a short booklet by campus that indicates your strategic needs, so someone might say, out of these 5 different things, and maybe they'll even call you or Tom Hiles and say, this really intrigues me, instead of coming up with their own ideas about what they would like to see as opposed to what it is we need. Thank you very much.
We've seen both. We have some who come to us and they know what they're interested in. We've had others that already, in my experience, we've had others that it's a matter of a conversation and it's a couple things that they might say, and that then we recognize that they're interested in that. And Tom and his team are well versed in having a lot of the concepts that are out there, and then we can very quickly switch and start talking about here's what we're doing in that area. And that's why you'll notice I gave this presentation the way I did, because as Chancellor, it's really important that I understand the full breadth of this institution, where we have the strength, what our outstanding faculty are, what are the types of things we're interested in moving forward on as an institution. Once I have all of that, then my conversations with donors and others is much more robust. It has more, the things that they might be interested in, and I can quickly pull that up and talk to them about it. So yes, it's a partnership of how do we get to that point and understand what they're interested in. So yes, good point. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Daryl.
And, okay, so what is their appetite? What would be, just based on your experience, what would be a donor's appetite for, a budget shortfall category? Of course, you define it a little bit better than that, but what would a donor's appetite be for that?
I'm going to have to be pretty frank on this one and to say some might walk out of the conversation if we bring it up. It's that low. There's not a lot of appetite for that. People are thinking about how can they make a lasting impact? What is it that can really transform the institution? How many students, for example, might they impact with what they're investing and donating? So it's really hard to talk to them about solving existing problems, because that is something that they expect the institution will solve. right? They want to think about what's the value add and how do they improve the institution and make it into, transform the institution into the outstanding institution that they identify with, and they want to even make it greater.
One other question, Alex, and we'll go to you, Jamie, I'm sorry. You mentioned AAU several times.
Yes.
During your presentation.
Yes.
What is your #1 priority in, let's say, 2018 here to improve Mizzou's standing in the AAU? I know we've mentioned medical school research, as one.
Yeah.
Maybe increase in production in, the Bond Life Sciences Center. What do you identify as that #1 priority?
So the #1 priority, it will be research expenditures, right? And it's overall, I mean, that's the big picture, research expenditures. So if I look at that, I said I want to double research expenditures in 5 years. To do that, then you have to think strategically about what areas can you double in, right? If I go down the list, we have some areas that are, I mentioned, animal science, for example, and how good they are already. It's probably going to be very difficult for them to double in being #1, right? I mean, it's a little hard to do that when you're already that high. But there are others that have tremendous potential. Clinical trials, biomedical research, our NIH funding, our ability to get additional funding from other sources that we might. I always think about, when I think about research, I think about our share. You have to think about market share. So I look at how many faculty we have. I think about what's the amount of market share I should be expecting as an institution that's in the AAU, and I look at which federal agencies am I underperforming in, right? So if I know that, then I can start thinking, okay, I need to grow in this area because clearly I'm behind in that area, right? So those are the things that we're looking at. NIH, for example, we can improve some of the activities we have with the Department of Defense. I think it's also about how do we grow our faculty in terms of their national prominence, because their reputation drives a lot of funding. So we need to be thinking about how we really attract and reward the best and brightest. So it's all of those things that we need to be doing to drive our research forward. Industry funding is another area where I think we have great potential. And the reason I think we have great potential there is quite simple. Higher ed is changing. Industry is changing. The industry doesn't want to necessarily be in the business of all of the development, but they're worried about working with higher education if they feel that all that the higher education partner is going to do is focus on the fundamental, which then can't translate into a product. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you think about an environment where the industry has access and that we deal with all of the IP issues that they're worried about and make sure that they understand that Mizzou is open for business? We want you to partner here because, quite frankly, what we do more for this economy than anything is we produce the next generation of employees. And we want those partnerships, and we want our students to have the opportunities in industry so that they can succeed. So I think there's a great opportunity for us to grow industry partnerships and grow the things that we're doing in terms of research. So we have some ideas of areas we want to target, and we'll continue to expand on all of those.
I'm going to let Curator Farmer have the last word in question because we do need to move on to the critical issues.
Sorry.
But
Okay.
no, it's very, very good discussion.
The question was that, I had a sneak peek of the 160/90
Yes.
Presentation, and they're putting together some amazing brand collateral for the University of Missouri and really helping us streamline our messaging. So I'm curious if you and Tom are working together with 160/90 to maybe have them be helpful in delivering this one-page message that we want to go out to our donors, both individuals and industry with, because I think that would be a really powerful tool for us to tap into to help us get that messaging out there.
Absolutely. I mean, we are working with them on lots of things in terms of how do we, so what you saw so far was sort of that high level, here's how you structure a campaign, here's what it might look like, and now we need to take that concept and then filter that down into all of the different areas where we use it. And so yes, we want to make sure that anything we're doing in philanthropy has that sort of image, that brand, that identity, because I think there is some real elegance in the way that it's being presented that reflects well on this state and on Mizzou. So agree 100%.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cartwright. That really was a wonderful presentation and a great discussion by the board. I would like to move on, Dr. Graham. Steve Graham is going to lead and introduce the participants in our critical issues, which is distance learning and campus collaboration.
Okay, good morning. I'm well aware that we're running a bit behind time, and the president has asked me to shrink it down.
Well, what we're going to have to do, because we do have an important executive session coming up immediately, is I'm probably going to cut it off at 12 o'clock, but that's a little over an hour.
Oh, okay. We can definitely do that. I will still move fast because I know you want to get into the discussion part. Let's see. Today we're going to talk about e-learning and about technology and distance learning, and I think that, you know, I would want to add that I have some colleagues here from the 4 campuses I'll add some more detail. I know that you'll want to have some conversations about it, so we've got Anthony, Andy, Devin, Kim, and then Jim Spain too, so we should have the basis covered for some of your questions as you want to dig a little bit deeper. That said, I'm going to move along pretty quickly. Course sharing is really kind of a augmentation to it. This is basically, we talked about yesterday with the faculty during our conversation with the board members, and this is just to kind of show you what's possible. These are courses that are offered on one campus that students from a second or third campus are able to take it. So if I'm a professor at Mizzou, I can offer a class, offer it online, and students in Kansas City or St. Louis can jump in the so-called empty seats. We've set it up so that the students pay their home campus, so no fees are exchanged. So that really serves as an encouragement for the campuses to kind of reach out to a partner. I would say that both Gary and Alan and I have talked about this. We think that there are some real enhancements, because right now we talked about this a lot, so I won't go into detail, but there are issues with library resources, and IT systems don't match just yet. And so a lot of it's kind of manual and hand-to-hand combat. And so having said that, you'll see the growth in it. And last fall, we offered 23 courses in this format with almost 250 students that were able to jump into empty seats on another campus course to kind of get benefit from that. So that's a really great way to share faculty. I think we can grow that pretty dramatically. The next slide. So now we're going to move into more of the e-learning or with technology piece of it, and I guess I'd want to just give a little explanation, and that is that there's many forms of what we call e-learning, electronically enhanced, and that it sometimes takes the form of 100% online. Other times it's a mixed mode where it's a hybrid course where students attend 1 or 2 days a week. We have programs that are sort of hybrid in the sense that they have some of the courses that are fully online and others that are face-to-face. And so what we're going to try to do today is to kind of give you a quick update about where we are, how we stack up against our peers, and then again, with the whole idea, what can we do differently? What can we do to really ramp it up or change things? And like I said, I've got lots of folks here to help me. We looked at a few things in the very beginning, and we wanted to measure our progress. So we said, let's look at how many semester credit hours are we teaching in 100% online classes. Now, a lot of our other classes, in fact, most of them, have a technology component. But to differentiate it and to watch to see how we could grow, because one of our goals is to provide access to students and provide alternatives for them. And so you can see in the last 5 years, where we have fairly decent data that we have the same definitions, across the system we've grown about 71% in just the number of credit hours that we offer. And you can see it varies by campus based on different kinds of needs and technology. And I would add, and our folks here from the e-learning leaders on campus will help elaborate, not every class is available to be offered online because some content is different. Not every faculty member wants to teach online, and some kinds of students. So it does vary, okay? The next slide talks about the number of enrollments. This is just the sheer number of enrollments. And over the past 5 years, you can see not quite doubled, but we've gone from what was about 82% increase. And you can see the numbers now that you see the growth is 75,000 enrollments. Now that means that's the number of students enrolled in classes. So if I took one class in the fall, one class in the spring, that would count as 2. Okay? Once again, 82% growth in the last 5 years overall. You can see a pretty dramatic growth at Mizzou. Okay, so those are enrollments. The other thing is we look at the number of students. So this is an individual student that's taking a class 100% online, and you can see we jumped from just over 22,000 students overall to close to 35,000 today. And once again, you can see the differences among the campuses in this slide. It shows the growth at Mizzou and at S&T growing pretty dramatically. Okay? Now, one measure that I think is really interesting to look at, and that is that what is the percentage of our students who take at least one 100% class online? Ideally, and we talked about, these are not only distance students, but these will be students that will be taking classes, they're on campus or they're living in Columbia, and because of schedule or work or the availability of classes, these classes often are very appealing to students. I'll use the Bachelor of Health Sciences program as an example. The last 2 years are available completely online, so they serve those students, but they have almost, I think it's 1,900 majors majoring in Bachelor of Health Sciences. 5 years ago, only 26% of the of the UM students took at least one 100% class online. Our goal would be that students, all students, may someday take at least one a year, because it's good for them to learn how to use that technology. We've jumped up to the point where almost 41% of the students over this year are taking classes, at least one class that's online. And like I said, many of those will be students in our residence halls or whatever, okay? Just wanted to give you some quick numbers in terms of, also we look at blended. Oh, one comment that I want to add is that even though we're back at 41% system-wide, I think Mizzou is at almost about 47%. So almost half of their students will take at least one class 100% online. Here's just, now you have the slides, so I'm going through this fast, but you can refer to them later, and I'm happy to answer any questions. This is just a quick refresh. We're also looking at the blended classes. We monitor that to see how we're doing. Okay? And so then basically one of the big questions is, what are we trying to accomplish? So as I mentioned, not every course fits well online. Not every instructor wants to teach online. So we want to increase our retention by giving students different options, different formats, different learning styles. We want to increase access, those students at a distance. We want to look at allowing students to have options so that they can have different kinds of programs. And we want to eventually meet the students' needs. So,
Quick question before you go too far further.
yep.
When you looked at the graph about enrollments in blended courses, 3 out of 4 of the campuses appear to have fewer in 2017 than in the previous year, percentage-wise. Is there any significance to the fact that we don't have an increase in the use of blended course distance learning?
I'm not sure exactly. If anybody want to comment about that? You and Kim?
In some cases, can you hear me?
Yes.
In some cases, faculty who were teaching a blended class choose to convert that to a fully online class because it better meets student needs. It's more accessible to true distance students, or even campus students really prefer a fully online class. So a lot of times it's an academic decision within the department about the modality that best suits the students.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
If I could add here, because it is an important point. At the end of the day, there's a very brief report on what we gleaned from our student meetings last year, but the #1 concern among students as a barrier to their success among all 4 campuses was class wait lists for required classes, particularly for graduation. And in that regard, can you comment briefly, how can we use online to alleviate that, which was the #1 concern that we received from students last year?
Okay. I can handle that, but I've got these people I've made drive in from state, so Andy, Kim, somebody?
So I'm Anthony from S&T. I really think that using the online platform is the future to accomplish that task and to get students off those wait lists. We have been very successful in utilizing innovation in our classrooms, like chemistry, 101 and using innovative technologies to bring more students into the classroom and allow the lab component to be done outside of the laboratory, expanding our capacity. So I think that's the future for us.
Anyone else?
Got two microphones. Yeah, it's really the, part of it is that we're looking at our retention efforts, and we look specifically at bottleneck courses and say, these are the kinds of courses we want to be able to target to put online as extra sessions, because it gives the students more flexibility, but it's also identifiable in the fact that there are wait lists. We can work with faculty then to say, is this a good idea to kind of maybe put in an online section as well as a face-to-face section?
So we can legitimately tell the students that we as an institution across all 4 campuses understand that concern, and we are working on addressing it, and in particular using the online platform to address just that problem. Thank you.
Okay. The other thing too, so we're going to give you some comparisons across the country. So not only we look at comparing ourselves to ourselves, but how are we doing against other institutions. I will admit the data is very hard to get, to glean. Everybody uses a different definition. People put more or less up on their website. So I just kind of want to caution you. So to look at this stuff in terms of sort of directional rather than exact numbers. But, we also then have some kind of national rankings, and I will have to say, I'll just use the word wonky, because sometimes you'll see, because they use different definitions and different organizations use different strategies, one time you'll come out high, the next month you'll come out low. So we, once again, keep those in mind. We did want to focus on 2 things, though, because President Choi would like all the campuses to increase the number of programs that are offered fully online, as well as the number of courses that are available fully online, not only to provide distance access to new students, but also to serve our other students, as Curator Stillman just pointed out, okay? So here you can see now, we realize a lot of the institutions have more than 15 peers, but for sake of being able to display this, we picked the top 15 institutions from each of the peer groups. You can see the big names up there that you'd expect in terms of Maryland, Florida, Penn State, but in terms of number of programs, total online degrees at Mizzou, 78. And once again, the courses, we got this information as best we could. So I wouldn't say that 612 is more than 588, but just use it in terms of directionally, okay? MU does tend to get ranked in a lot of different places. They have some really interesting rankings in terms of some of the stuff that came out that just ranked one that I like, that ranked a lot of the other institutions fairly high that I thought should be there, and they do fairly well. But we can talk about those a little later. Here you can look at the data from, the comparative data from UMKC, both the number of courses and programs they have online, a little bit more down the middle of the pack. Okay, once again, I'm flying through these, but you have all these slides. S&T, and keep in mind, among their peer group of other institutions that are technology oriented, they have the most number of programs, and probably it looks almost like the largest number of courses. They offer their courses right now in a different format. They use kind of a videotape. They have studios where faculty lecture in class or teach in class, and that's broadcast out to be available live, but then they also archive it. So they really serve, as you can see, their specialty is in the area of graduate professional development for engineers, oftentimes engineers in place working. They can charge a high dollar for those programs because they're paid for by the company and highly sought after. I think that talking with Anthony this morning, one of the possibilities, because they have a limited number of these kinds of studio rooms, would be to go in terms of the online space. So anyway, and once again, you can kind of see the ratings and rankings there. Okay. UMSL ranks a little bit lower. You can see, once again, they're fairly clustered though. When you look at the number of programs, right about there, it starts to go 25, 26. The number of courses varies very greatly. Old Dominion, that's probably the most I've ever seen of any one particular institution. Talking with Andy this morning a little bit, and he can elaborate on that, but they have a lot of programs where they, particularly in the health fields, where they have a clinical requirement, so they can't call it 100% online. He thought perhaps even as much as double or triple if you could count those programs that are really like 90% online, but they have a clinical component, okay? And once again, there's some rankings, and like I say, they tend to fly all over the place. So anyway, so I want to kind of close before we start the discussion. And once again, think of e-learning in all the ways that you have in terms of it's a way to bring access to students that aren't in our campus at a distance. It's the way to serve our existing students. It's the way to improve the way we teach. You've probably heard of flipped classrooms where they do a lot of the work outside of class before they come in. And so then I'll pause right now and, right.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate what you all are doing here. When you first began, you mentioned that the systems obviously don't quite talk to each other yet. Is that correct? But you also mentioned that, which I thought was interesting, that you could teach a class, and if that university didn't fill it, you could go out to one of the other campuses, one of the other universities. Is that correct?
For a select number that have set up that way.
Okay, so if University of Missouri teaches one and they fill 3/4 of it, but then UMKC and UMSL and S&T students could go into that. Is that right?
That's correct for those.
Where does that system sit? Is that here or where? How does that work?
Basically, and I'm going to look to Gary and to Brenda too, we use the exact systems that we have now through what was Blackboard is now Canvas. And so what we have to do, and this is where it gets kind of funky, and we think we have a way to do it better, but we basically would set up a course and then sort of a partner course with the same title on another campus. So the students at UMSL would then register through UMSL, pay UMSL tuition, but now we've got two systems, and as much as we can make them talk to each other, it works pretty well. We'd like to break some of those firewalls, and the other thing is it would be nice, let's say, for example, if Gary's teaching a class at Mizzou, I think one of the opportunities we have is to try to get an appointment for Gary at UMSL, because most of our tenure track or non-tenure track full-time faculty should certainly be eligible for a courtesy appointment. Then he could actually be appointed on both campuses, and sort of he would just be teaching just as if he were teaching like a section on campus that had two sections. So that's, I think, I don't know, Gary, if you want to,
Yeah.
and Brenda's there too.
That is correct. We do have, each of the campuses have their own student information system, and our policies and procedures require that we track the students that are enrolled and admitted to those different institutions. We have not historically made it a practice to have students that are easily enrolled across the campus boundaries, but that is not a technological impediment that can't be easily removed. It is a decision or a policy discussion that needs to happen, and we're considering that.
So do you think, and obviously you can probably do somewhat specialized classes this way, is that correct?
Oftentimes they are.
Okay, what about more basic classes? Does it ever make sense to make that very simple where everybody could come in and, I mean, is that too far in the future?
I'm going to give an answer, and then I'm going to turn to have them keep me honest. On a lot of the basic classes, there really isn't a problem because we have plenty of students to fill all those seats. In fact, sometimes we run out, on the large ones, we run out of room just in terms of space. It's probably in those specialized courses where this works better. Linda talked about it, Linda Mitchell from UMKC, in terms of specialties. I'll give you a really good example. We have a very innovative new director in the social sciences unit in Ag, or Kaffner, excuse me, and they, in agribusiness, want to offer courses in supply chain management. Well, through some connections he made through our leadership program, he found out that UMSL has a really good, solid program like that in their business school. So they made arrangements to have students jump in the UMSL course, and I think there's some 14 Mizzou students enrolled in that class this semester, and so he doesn't have to hire faculty, he doesn't have, at the same time, and what's coming back is their connections with Monsanto and all the agribusiness is really a boon to the College of Business. So those are the kinds of collaborations, the innovations that we really can foster. The big classes, I think, if anything, we may have trouble. Okay, so.
And in fact, it goes back to the question about access and bottleneck courses. On the large classes, we've deployed technology to address bottlenecks. So when we were at our surge or our peak of enrollment, a lot of the courses, especially the gateway gen ed courses in the College of Arts and Sciences, were developed as fully online to address our capacity issues. And now we have that to grow back into. But as Steve said, most of our sweet spot in the shared courses is where we share the very unique expertise we have on the different campuses.
One other really good illustration is what they've done in nursing, and that they have 3 PhD programs in nursing, and because of the nature of schedules and nurses' pay and all that kind of stuff, there would be a somewhat small number of students in there. And they were teaching advanced stats and methods courses, which they need a number of high-end courses, but with 4 or 5 students in each class. They bundled about 10 different courses together, so they take turns teaching those so that one expert, they only have to have a statistician or a research methodologist in one campus, and they can now have 10 to 12, 15 students in that class. That's the kind of real smart stuff that we can do. Unfortunately, and I'll be honest, we've driven a little bit crazy when we're trying to mix these systems that don't quite match, because sometimes they can't get the library resources, sometimes it doesn't connect well. You've got, so we've had to go in and hand add things and make those links. And I think Brenda and Gary, and I want to call up Brenda Selman, who's actually, we're cooking up a plan. We think we can do better. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or?
Yes, part of it is changing the business approach, and Steve talked about it earlier, that the way that we've gone about this, we did a lot of the work and behind the scenes, but it's made it clunkier for the faculty. If we actually have the faculty appointed on multiple campuses, and then we can use the processes that we've developed to merge the learning management system so the students are all in the same discussion group despite being in 2 different locations. We think that, well, we know we've been able to do that, and then we can work on the technology about pushing back the grades or those kind of things behind the scenes, but it lets the technology work together better. So we're talking about how we'll kind of flip our business model.
Thank you.
Part of the thinking too, to be honest, we wanted to see if it was going to scale before we took on all these IT challenges. So when you see in the very beginning, a couple years ago, we only offered 5 or 6 courses. This last semester, we were at 23. We had 30 enrollments on the primary, or on the secondary campus. Now we had 250. So now we go, okay, this is an idea that was kind of wild that Hank Foley and I came up with based on conversations with the board, and now it's the scale. In fact, you see, what's interesting is if you look at the enrollment on the primary campus is almost matching the enrollment in the other campuses, which is really interesting. So we look at these numbers that we just came in this last year and we go, okay, got to fix this. But before we took that challenge on, we wanted to. And I would say that IFC has been integral in that discussion from the very beginning, 3, 4 years ago, to say, hey, we can do this, and now we're just figuring out, trying to smooth out some of the rough spots.
So I have a couple observations and a request, and I don't mean to throw a monkey wrench into how this is organized, but this is bleeding into the question of systemness in terms of platform and I'm going to ask, can we go ahead and get the last module here, which is different models of distance learning, which gets us to shared platform. And I make this point, I think you've done a great job of updating us by campus.
Right.
And I'll make a couple of comments about that. One is, when you're talking about numbers of students enrolled, of course, the MU statistics are higher. So the graph looks like, well, MU's so far ahead. And also in terms of the growth. Again, the growth is where you start from. And the MU numbers look higher because my perception was that S&T and UMSL were both ahead of the MU campus 5 years ago when we first spoke, not UMKC. And so the growth for them doesn't show as much as the growth in MU because it's where you start from. And I think actually UMSL has been pretty well recognized for their advancement. Now you did do some comparisons to other peers, but it depends on what peers you select. Arizona State wasn't in the MU comparison. I'm not sure why. So what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is skip to the question of what can we do in terms of having one university in terms of these distance courses and what impediments there are. And there was a little bit of table conversation the first morning where Gary was sitting at the breakfast, not the breakfast table, but that first discussion talking about maybe there's some new hardware, software that's being available that will make it easier for us to have system online courses or distance learning. Is that too much trouble to skip to the last module?
I think that's a wonderful segue, and I thank you for asking that question. One footnote, though, is I do want to give a shout out to MU, though, because they're at like 850 courses or so now. They were, I happen to have this in 2013, they were at 500. So they were pretty good, but they've come on strong.
Yeah.
In part because they have a lot of on-campus students now, that mixing and matching that we knew was going to occur. But I'm now, I guess if
Turn it over to
Dr.
Barbara.
Bickelmeyer, if you want to come up. Thank you for the segue.
Okay, good.
Want to skip the slides?
And I don't mean to diminish while she's getting ready the question of the data analytics capacity. That too is a system issue and equally important. And so we need to be sure we get to that before noon. But this seems to me to be the right progression. Keep on distance learning and then get into data analytics.
Thank you. And I actually have tweaked my remarks in some order, listening to the conversation, so I will try to be both expeditious and pointed to some of the questions you asked. And I had sent out a copy of an article called System-Wide Approaches to Online Education or Online Programs to the curators previously for a background reading. Basically, let me just take a line that Alex had used as he was starting up the presentation about Mizzou campus. Alex said, you can't get where you want to be if you don't know where you are. And I would just build on that and say, you can't get to where you want to be if you don't consciously decide where you want to be and devise a strategy to get there. And so that's a little bit of the framing. I had provided the article from Inside Higher Education that mentioned there are different ways that multi-campus institutions or multi-institutional systems organize online education, and it mentioned several different ways. It said, first of all, it gave an example that campuses lead. It used the University of Illinois as an example there and explained that in that institution, the programs from the campuses are determined by faculty and they keep that decentralized. It also gave an example of a separate arm as an approach. I think the strongest example of that in this country is Penn State University's global campus. And that started any number of years ago, really came out of their extension programs and was for the purpose of actually building on the historical agricultural model that they used. The third example that they give in that article is combining forces, which I call aggregation. They cited there Nebraska. They also cited there UMass Online. Generally, those models basically take courses that are at all campuses. They put them onto a website. They provide marketing for that, and they give a brand identity to that. And then last of all, they focused on what they called mixed approaches, where they highlighted the University of California and Indiana University, where I was the founding director of the Office of Online Education to bring the 7 campuses together there. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of what I learned from that experience and how that relates. And that model of mixed approaches was really around finding a way to be a curricular clearinghouse and then providing shared services. At the bottom line of all those questions is, again, I think something that Curator Chapman acknowledged when he was talking about tuition. And I would say that a starting point for an institution or a system around the use of online education has to be what is in the best interest of students. And that is not necessarily simply the most inexpensive tuition or the most inexpensive experience. It's what's the best educational experience for the dollar. And there are a number of strategies to point to. So for example, we've already talked about that a priority might be reducing wait list. or bottleneck courses. We also mentioned that it might be important to cover general education courses that students need and can't get on campus, or to provide a greater variation of the kinds of courses that students have access to, or the ability to engage in a flexible formatting experience. So beyond that, the question really is around positioning in the market. And to that end, all of those examples I just gave from Inside Higher Ed and that article are about branding. And the question is, do you use online to be a branded house or a house of brand, to use marketing terms? And what I mean by that is, and this is where Penn State, for an example, had an opportunity for strength because they went in so early. Do you have in your region or in your area a brand such as Penn State Online, or do you have multiple brands that are strong? So for example, in the University of California, Cal Berkeley and UCLA and actually UCSB are all very different and very strong brands, and actually the same in the case of Illinois between UI Chicago and Champaign-Urbana. So there's a question of how do you build on what you need to provide to students with what is the strength of your faculty in your various campuses and what do they have to bring. There are a few questions generally to ask in determining that strategy. The first one is, which students need online programs? And again, I'd notice, and you could flip back to Steve's slides, and I'll do this really quickly if I can, maybe.
I'll do that and
Okay.
you keep talking.
Go back to the slide with Columbia on it and compared to its competitors.
So we thought this would work.
Okay. So on this topic about what's best for students, you can look at that slide and which students need particular online programs. And again, I'll just use experiences I know. And you look at down below, you can look at University of Kansas or Indiana University Bloomington, and you'll notice in this case, Bloomington isn't very interested in online bachelor's programs. They're relatively interested in online master's programs, but they have 600 or so online courses. If you flip to the next one and look at UMKC and IUPUI is listed there, again, something I know something about. You see IUPUI is listed high there in terms of bachelor's degrees and master's and the number of courses. Those are two different strategies. And what an AAU institution needs in terms of providing support for its students is very different than what an urban metropolitan research campus will do. So I think that's part of thinking about being a house of brands or a branded house. So thinking first of all, again, which students need online programs. It's determined by undergraduate strategy is very different than a graduate strategy, particularly if you have underprepared students. Underprepared students, all the research shows, do less well in online courses or fully online curricula. Graduate students obviously have already demonstrated success. They know how to self-manage and they know how to learn, so there are more opportunities for them to be successful. Secondly, the question that needs to be asked is, for each group, which options do they need? And again, you heard us talking about this a little bit when we talked about the fact that our students actually, whatever we offer, determine their own strategies for online. And the fact that you have students who are in on-campus programs who choose 100% online programming in any given semester, they're telling you they can't be on campus that semester and they need to be doing other things. Or students who are taking one class online even though they're in an on-campus program are telling you they need some flexibility. And then there's, of course, the building of blended courses. So thinking about how students' enrollment taking strategies and patterns work inform what you might want to do on a campus by campus or an overall university perspective. The third question in terms of overall strategy that helps to determine which way to go is online education part of the normal operations of the university, or should it be something wholly separate? For example, Purdue making the decision to buy a for-profit vendor and bring it into online. That actually creates some massive sub-optimization in terms of how you use your existing faculty. However, that is a strategy. And again, you could go back to Penn State as an example of that. Why did they choose to create a fully separate operation? Actually, if you talk to folks from Penn State over the course of the last several years, they're trying to figure out how they fold that massive cost of operation back into the university and the various campuses because they can't afford two separate operational entities anymore. But the reason to think about operational organization is for two purposes. One, is there sub-optimization between the programs and the services? That's one reason why Penn State went the way they went very early on. They wanted to make sure that their campuses weren't unnecessarily competing against each other. I recently did an audit for the University of Massachusetts online, and they are actually looking at the fact that they found that that aggregator model was creating sub-optimization, where the UMass Amherst online MBA was losing in competition to UMass Lowell's online MBA because they were both listed and on the aggregator site, and UMass Lowell was actually a less expensive program, and so that actually was detracting from UMass Amherst enrollments. So thinking about sub-optimization of relationships is critical. Secondly, what are the opportunities for synergy? And those opportunities for synergy are, for example, if one campus is strong in professional programs and another campus is strong in STEM programs and another campus is strong in arts and humanities programs, there's an opportunity to create synergy while creating different identities. And then fourth critical question, again, is this: what is our conscious position in the market? Do we choose to be a house of brands, or do we choose to be a branded house? And the reason that's important, and again, I think thinking about in the UM constellation of campuses, UMKC already has a strong brand in its programs, as you can see from nursing. Columbia already has a strong presence in Mizzou online, and of course UMSL and S&T have strong presence with what they're doing. So if there's going to be a brand overarching that, the question would be, how do you build that brand, and how does it recognize and strengthen the existing brands rather than diluting those? And actually, again, just in my history and my experience, the reason why the Indiana University created IU Online as a brand and took the approach to create a curricular clearinghouse and do shared services was simply because we had campuses in competition with each other that didn't have the name recognition, and we needed to make sure that we strengthened that brand across the state. Finally, this question that Curator Phillips is constantly reminding us of is, how do we use the data that's generated from online to help us improve our academic operations, and how do analytics actually inform our decision making? And of course, there's data from the learning management systems, but we also have to look at our academic program data and our enrollment data, as well as data for each of our campuses. We have something around student retention. So for example, at UMKC, we are engaged with an organization called Civitas to look at student retention and through our courses. It's bringing that kind of data together that helps us bring together student enrollment patterns, where student success is occurring, along with our academic program efficiencies and productivity to determine our solution. And I think the best thing that you can do is to try to understand each campus's online strategy, roll those up again, and find where there's sub-optimization and where there are opportunities for synergy to create an overarching approach. And that's as fast as I can say those 5 points. So thank you for listening to me.
That was pretty fast.
That was fast. Can I just say that those are profound, fundamental questions that we're not going to solve here today. And I'm going to look to President Choi and say, I mean, those are really, some of those things are things I've never thought about. So what plan would we have for administration considering those profound fundamental issues and making a recommendation?
I would say the model that is most attractive to us at this point is recognizing the strengths that we have in each of the campuses and ensuring that we market that using RANQ, which is a partner we already have, but also that's used to meet the needs of students who are external to our campus. But internal to our campuses, as Curator Lehman asked, we have to break down these barriers that limit the ability of our students from one campus to take courses at another campus. As you saw, we have the foundations at each of the campuses, but we're just not working together, and that's the issue. So that's what I would like to pursue, but I'd like to get input as well from the board.
I'd like to stay on this for just a second because, and Curator Phillips was helpful in putting this together. This has been, when I first came on the board, you were already dealing with this issue. So I want to just say one of the things, I'm really agnostic as to whether we ought to be a system or one campus. I probably pushed my frustration with the system, but I'm agnostic and I'm hoping the task force can come up with some best practices and answer that. But if there is something that makes me doubt and question whether we can continue as 4 separate campuses, it is the inability to break down these barriers and make use of today's technology and online services. And I personally am frustrated with that. Gary said that technology is not what's standing in our way. We just haven't made that policy decision, which I find bewildering, because as we are going forward and talking about our challenges today, and as we're talking about our relationship with the legislature, with their sources of funding, I don't see why they take us seriously if we can't use modern technology the way business can to make it easier for our consumers, who are our students, to graduate and to add to student success. There was also a statement, Steve Graham said, as much as we can make them talk to each other. So let me say again, I am agnostic as to the 4 campuses. I understand that that provides great opportunity and a chance to innovate and to differentiate. But if that desire to differentiate leads us not to talk to each other to solve the problems of this state and this university system, then we have to take a serious look whether we can have 4 independent campuses. Another thing was said that we have to decide whether we're a branded house or how'd you put it? House that brands. That is a fundamental question that we have the best and the brightest in the state, and we can't continue to tread water without making this fundamental decision. So I'm saying this because this is what your task force is going to deal with. This is the fundamental question. You said, why is Arizona State not there? Arizona State's not there because they're not a system. They have managed to be one university, multi-campuses, and solve their online compatibility issues. So I probably come off as pedantic or lecturing, but I will say I think that I understand the state of Missouri and what they're looking for. And they're looking for us to solve problems, not to create boundaries to student success, because we can't use modern technology. So I hope that this leads us to the fundamental questions of the task force, and that we, this board, take the opportunity to make decisions on how we're proceeding. And if we can't make people talk to each other, Dr. Graham, you tell us what we need to do to make them talk to each other.
Can you use the mic? Use the mic? Yes.
And I apologize, I thought that might have been misunderstood. The systems don't talk to each other. In other words, when we go to the shared courses, the faculty actually are quite willing to talk to each other. It's the systems that don't.
Well, and I don't want to be too critical, but we are behind times in dealing with this. How many campuses at SUNY? And you've solved this problem at New York.
Made a lot of progress.
Have you made more progress than we have with our 4 campuses?
I'm not 100% sure now.
Okay.
I've learned a lot in the last
Okay.
I'll probably talk a little bit.
Yeah. You're as smart here as you were there, right?
Smarter.
And I know that Alex hasn't had his opportunity to come up here yet, though I will point to one slide I did have in there to your point, Curator Steelman, which is, and again, this is based on experience from another institution, so take that for what it's worth in terms of the context and being able to transfer. But some of those fundamental decisions that had to be made that I mentioned in bringing 7 campuses together at Indiana University started with basic infrastructure questions. And the first basic infrastructure question was, what were the formal mechanisms created for shared decision making? And by that I mean formal. There's quite a bit of good informal conversation to occur, but what's a governance body or an oversight around online? We had to craft a new council and bring people together and document what their charge and what their representation would be and what decisions they would be responsible for. And then based on that, they made decisions around programming and IT platforms and formulas for revenue sharing in this case. Again, that doesn't matter. And finance structures for moving dollars and any number of things we decide about back office operations and shared services. So to that point, the question really that you start with is how do we decide to decide? And that was where we started, is how are we going to decide to decide?
No, certainly.
So, quick question. What is the market acceptance for online degrees? You know, there was a point in time where people maybe thought it was a joke if you had an online degree, and you're going in. And you're going in to compete with someone that has a degree, you know, that they've done traditionally. And I wonder if we have any data on that, data of employment rates after graduation, starting salaries, whatever it may be for our online degree holding people versus our people that did it the traditional way. Do you have any information on that, Barb?
I don't have the most recent information. I do know that there is that data available, so I can't speak to that exactly, but I can say conceptually that those institutions that are fully online still do not enjoy the same kind of placement of students that institutions that have historically had, you know, been built of an on-campus or place-based experience have. And I would say the other challenge with that, or the other good news for institutions like the University of Missouri and its 4 campuses, are that it is harder and harder to distinguish between what's an online diploma and what's not an online diploma. In fact, that was one of the things that led Indiana University to make the decision to try to normalize our operations and not do something separate. They wanted a degree that said global campus. We wanted an Indiana University degree, regardless of what the platform was for that. I will also say, though, that there's still quite a bit of data, though the distance is growing. About 5 or so years ago, you would say, if you looked at program taking statistics, people generally took an online program, a fully online program, from an institution that was within 75 miles of where they lived because they wanted to be able to get to a campus. It's one reason why you can't really say the University of Phoenix or Western Governors, for example, are fully online institutions, because you'll notice that they've built buildings in almost every metropolitan area in the country because their students need to get somewhere. That number is increasing. I think 2 or 3 years ago, I heard that it's now about 100 miles, but there's still a place-based aspect to online programming.
And I think these programs are great because these are people that probably wouldn't have had an opportunity to get a degree from, you know, schools as great as the ones in our system. So I like the access that it gives people, but I just want to make sure they're getting a good return on their investment and an opportunity to compete with other folks.
Well, and it's I would also add, though, to the fact that you really have to look at retention, and retention matters for us. And for-profit institutions have not historically had to hold the retention rates that we have had to hold in order to meet our accreditor standards. That is one reason why the federal government has gone very aggressively into analyzing and assessing the productivity of those kinds of schools. And so there's a lot of work that's being done there. So,
online, on campus, 1 degree. You can't distinguish. Curator Chapman, it's the faculty who are teaching in our online programs are the same faculty who are teaching on our in-seat face-to-face. And when we report a course on a transcript, it doesn't designate whether it was online or on campus the same way it doesn't designate whether it was in a 500-seat auditorium or a 20-seat small group discussion section. And we have students who graduate from a fully 100% online course, come to campus to go through commencement ceremonies. And so it's online, on campus, run by faculty in the academic departments, responsible for the quality of those courses and those degrees, regardless of the modality of how we deliver it. And that's the strength of our brand.
I think you're thinking of online universities like a Phoenix.
Okay.
So I've got 3 thoughts. One is this does bleed into Missouri being a broadband desert by and large. And so Missouri University, and I don't know if Marshall is here or not,
right over there,
is taking the lead, and there may be state or maybe even federal opportunity to increase broadband coverage so that our educational system can reach out to those students who need to study from home, by and large. I just wanted to make that note. Second note is, when you said we're now talking about deciding on the process, we shouldn't forget that we're a shared governance institution. And shared governance means between campuses. And so, President Choi, what I'm encouraging you to think about is, how do you go about resolving these profound questions? And you've got in this room the people who are most experienced and most knowledgeable. I mean, they're sitting on the front row and a couple in the second row, to have a task force that picks up all the campuses and brings them along in the thought process to come back to us and say, we've gone through this process and here's what we recommend. I'm just suggesting there's a little process. You can't jump from these questions to April and say, here's how we're going to do it. It's a process. And the third is, I think someone said a few minutes ago that Gary Allen said there isn't an infrastructure or a tech challenge here, it's a decision. It is true, it's a decision. But there is, and we've just scratched the surface of it, there is currently a technology impediment to sharing between campuses because they've developed in silos. And maybe we could have a couple of words from Gary about that, because there may be a solution. 2 years ago, there might not have been an easy solution, but hopefully solutions are coming about.
Yeah, so let me address that. For one thing, this is not something you solve and be done with. This is an ongoing evolution. We happen to be at a particular place in the technology cycle. Some of our peers are either ahead of us or behind us in the overall curve of that change. The systems that we have now that are core to maintenance of our student administrative data evolved on each campus in a separate ecosystem. We have them, it was actually a conscious decision that best fit the needs for the university as deemed by the leadership at that point in time. It actually was a cost savings to do things in the way that they were done over the 10 or 12 years that it took us to get these systems deployed. The leadership that you see here in the front row are leading online or distance programming that grew up within the context of each one of those campuses and met the needs at the time that they were developed and deployed. The current technology needs to be changed if we're going to change the way that we want to interoperate across the campus boundaries. That's not a bad thing. It's not a unique thing to Missouri. Every other one of our peers nationally is going through this same kind of discussion as to how best to optimize the technology to fit the business practice that wants to be put in place going forward. But this is like building a house. The data and the basis and the strategies is the foundation of that house. You don't go in and decide on the wiring diagram before you know what the foundation's going to look like and how you're going to lay out the floor plan. The technology is the communication that requires that house to be able to operate functionally. And you need to have a decision made about how you want the business to operate and then design the technology to optimally support it. We are doing things incrementally to make that happen already. The migration of all the campuses to a common learning management system is an indication of that. The changes that we're making right now as we go through and upgrade our student information system on all 4 campuses and bringing together the leadership about what ought to be more similar than currently is as we go into that upgrade. So this is not things that we aren't actively working on. It's just that we happen to be where we are at the moment. We need the leadership to decide what is our preferred future state, and we will help you build the technology that will support that and make sure that it optimizes when we get there.
So a parallel question that we did tee up for today is the data analytics, which raises similar questions about, we have technology on each campus and we actually have silos of information that we can't tap into and libraries that we can't tap into. And I know that, that Gary's given thought to that, and I believe that Chancellor Cartwright has given thought to that. And so I hope that we've got 15 minutes left. I hope we can tap into that. We can't really get into it that deep, but maybe that will be something that will roll into April.
So,
Go ahead, Dr.
Mr. Chair,
Alex, you need to, do you want Alex to cover the distance learning piece, or do you want me to cover the analytics report that I got back?
let me ask one more question of Gary.
Yes.
As I understand it, following up on John Phillips's question, you've been working on this constantly for 2-3 years, right? I mean, every time we've met in boards, you've given us a little bit of an update, and you say, look, we're working on it, we're trying to do this. So if that's true, where are we in this house building? I mean, have we got the basement done, and are we putting up studs, or what?
We have upgraded our finance infrastructure, we have upgraded our HR infrastructure, we have upgraded our advancement infrastructure, all of which are critical, interrelated and integrated systems that have to talk to our student system.
Okay.
Student has evolved more slowly, both in the marketplace and in terms of adoption across the country in our peer institutions. We are actively upgrading our student system right now. We just started that project. We'll have it upgraded by November of this fall. We will have it ready to be looking for a more distant future in what might be a cloud-based solution, in what might be a more standardized business process environment than we currently enjoy. That has to be done as we're building this plane at 35,000 feet in full flight, and we have to make these changes incrementally, but we are moving towards a more sustainable, a more efficient, and a system that will allow more choices on the part of all the campuses in terms of how they want to interoperate.
So you are making a lot of progress in a lot of areas, and I'm glad you brought that out. Back to the question, though, from the standpoint of the House, are we at the foundation, or where are we then?
In my estimation, we're directly addressing some of our most critical issues in the context of the analytics question that Curator Phillips has raised. Actually, President Troy has taken a tremendous step forward by demanding that data definitions that are used in his data dashboards for reporting on student success and retention be standardized across the entirety of the system. So
if I could, these are all important questions, but we have a hard stop because we have an important executive committee. So I'd like
Thanks, Gary.
Yep.
Alex to.
Okay. No, it's okay. I'm just going to take a couple minutes and mention a few things which I think are important in the discussion, and I'll try to weave in the data analytics in that. It was said earlier today that we really should be student-centered, student-focused, and I want to emphasize a few things. One is we need to be thinking about what students are looking for in online, and quite honestly, what they look at is brand, program, and price. So they start off by thinking about where it is that they're taking a course, and that's important. The other thing that I think is important is that differentiation and distinctiveness and what I would call diversity is not a bad thing. These are all strengths because it is the diversity that gives us a competitive advantage. And if I look at that way, there are opportunities where you can tune online so that we can capture more of the market as a system. What that means is we need to be a little bit different. So my simple-minded way of thinking of this is we all go to the grocery store and we look at a bunch of different apples. They're all apples, but we like different types. And you need to think of that when you're taking classes. This gets into the data and into the data analytics.
If I could just, I want, because I think that's a good point, and I want to make it clear on my point. I agree with you that diversity is a strength until you get to the grocery store and they won't let you buy any apples because, and that's, so I just wanted you to address that a little bit.
I agree. So when I think about what we're trying to do, I think about it more from a viewpoint of a student experience, right? Is that there are opportunities across the system where you could be thinking about different methods of delivery that actually respond to certain learning preferences. And so we could be thinking about how do we as a system, which is a different conversation than thinking about the platform, thinking about what we're doing. It's more a student-centered conversation that is thinking about how do we deliver the learning that the students need. That's a different goal. That's a different goal than thinking about how you combine, how you become more like one. It's more that what is in the best interest of the student. And all students learn differently. I'm much more visual learner. So I've been known to say when I was in SUNY that I would love to have had an opportunity to go to an institution that everything they taught was taught for people who are visual learners, because it would have been great for me. And I think that's what we should be thinking about, is how do we strengthen our position? Because of the scale we're at, we can do some things that other institutions can't do. And that is, you can provide opportunities for students that they may not be able to capture or have access to at other institutions. So it really is, how do you then enable the conversations around that differentiation and what it does for our students? In terms of data analytics, there are opportunities within our learning systems that are starting to really grow. And I don't know if you had any of this in there, Gary, but it really is around Canvas or Blackboard. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of activity in that space where people are looking at intermediate testing of students to then be able to give feedback in terms of which lecture worked best for them, which test works best for them, how do they learn. And that process could really help us to accelerate the learning. So if we do that, then it's a different, it allows us, so then the interconnection, the integration is a little different than what we've been talking about. That is, I could have, if I'm taking a class at Mizzou, maybe I have access to lectures that are being taught at UMSL, at UMKC, at S&T, but really I start to identify with one of those professors that's teaching it. We all know we have our favorite professors. And the favorite professors aren't necessarily because they're really great people. Most of the time it is that, a lot of the time. But it's also because they match your learning style. The way they teach matches your style. And that's an important thing that we could be leveraging. So I think about the data and what you could do in terms of what is happening with our students, how well are they learning, can we assess this process? To do that, then you need an infrastructure. And that's one of the things that I would talk about, is I think it is important for us to think about how do we do this across multiple campuses for the benefit of the students. And there's a lot of things we did that I think you can learn from a big system like SUNY, and that is we really went to a vision of a steering committee that was driven by practitioners, faculty, others, including students were on that group, that really thought about how do we make sure that the online effort is delivering what's needed in education. There's, of course, a lot of issues in here in terms of budget, finance, how do you share credit, how do you make sure that everybody's getting some money for that. There are communities of practice that are needed so that you could actually bring together the right people so that they could then have the impact. And the biggest part to that is really connecting technologists, people who know IT, know data analytics, with the people who are doing the education component. And we're starting to do a number of those things. Jim Spain is working at Mizzou, is working on a new center that is really looking at how does this get integrated and how do we do that for the benefit of the students. A lot of that driven by analytics. A lot of it is being able to know exactly where students are in their programs, what grades they're getting at certain times, and how do we intervene. I will mention a few other things that I want you to be aware of. Is this concept of personalized learning is important, and it's just like precision medicine. I think we're in an age that we need to be thinking about precision education. How do we educate students and provide courses in using a methodology that fits their learning style? That's things you can do, and there's ways that you could optimize doing that across a larger number of people. Shared degree programs, I was happy to hear that, we have programs where students finish their first 2 years at a community college, and because they're place-bound, we actually have a way that we deliver the last 2 years of their education for their bachelor's degree at the community college. And we give a discount because it's not affecting our infrastructure here. So there are a lot of things we could be doing. Yes, we need to be able to communicate across campuses. Yes, we need to be able to do the data analytics, but I don't want us to lose sight of what the ultimate goal is, which is to create an environment where we have a competitive advantage on the rest of higher education. And that competitive advantage is based on our ability to differentiate and have the distinctive elements that people are looking for. It's the same thing that hospitals do. It's the same thing that most industry does. So we just need to think about how we'll do that.
But I think this is what you're saying. And again, I just want to emphasize this, and I apologize, but I think, John, and you've teed this up very well, you are right as long as that serves the needs of the students.
Yes.
As long as we make it accessible, not to beat your
100%.
analogy to death, but if you go into the grocery store and you can't buy the John of Golds because you live on Hitt Street,
Absolutely.
and you only get the Honeycrisp, and that's not what you like, it's not going to work.
I'm with you, Curator Steelman. We don't want education deserts. We know there's a lot of food deserts where you can't get fruit, fresh fruit. We don't want that with education. So we need to ensure that we don't have those deserts and that everybody has access to all of the material. There are ways you can do this, and I think it means that we should think as a system, and this is when I said earlier about Mizzou being interested in innovation, is that I don't often, I look at what other people are doing, but I don't focus on what other people are doing. I think about what's the right way to do it, what should we be doing using the unique strengths that we have across our system to be the best in the country and be the leader. I don't want us to be looking and thinking that we just want to be like others.
You want it to be visionary.
Yes, visionary. And it'll be a little risky. And people will have to trust you sometimes that it may or may not work.
Well, John, I want to go to you because you spent a lot of time on this, and we're going to run out of time, but I want you to have all the time that you need because Curator Phillips also helped kind of put this together, and it's kind of his brainchild.
Well, I think we've gotten a great explanation of where we're at, and really thank Steve Graham for putting a lot together. It's was a lot of work in a very short period of time because this was late on the agenda, so I really think it's been very thoughtful, and I also think that Barbara's experience and the fundamental questions that she's raised in ways that are pretty understandable have teed it up, and Alex's experience at SUNY with data analytics. I mean, I think this has been great for us, and I do hope that Moon takes advantage of the various expertise on the campuses and moves it forward. I know that David and I have been impatient on this topic, and we would love to have all of the questions answered when we come back in April. I don't think you can do it because you won't have had the process, but I hope that the board's behind us, that we do understand that there are impediments. Some of them are technical, some of them are campuses and how the history's grown up, and I don't think anybody on the board has the answer, but we really appreciate your surfacing them so we can understand them, and we'll leave it to Moon to put together a process that comes back with recommendations.
I think that's a great summary statement, and I would also want to compliment the people here that helped pull this stuff together, but also the expertise right there in that front row and their colleagues as well. And then with that whole first row, okay, and Gary too. So good charge.
I want to revisit one thing before we all go. Gary, you mentioned you're waiting for a policy from the board or someone in administration. Are we clear of what policy we're supposed to be putting together for Gary?
I think I didn't mean to make that a personal charge to the board to get that done today. It represents a policy framework that is currently in place that needs to be discussed by the leadership on all the campuses as part of of the effort that Moon will lead us towards coming up with an overall solution for how this is going to go forward.
Let me say again, thank you very much. Steve, tremendous work in a short period of time. All of you, thank you very much for all your efforts. And this is public session only. We're going to go into an executive. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? The public session is adjourned. We're moving to an executive session.